Charles E. Wadlington, Sr., Wadlington. All right.
Mr. Wadlington, where do you live?
West Palm Beach, Florida.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a financial advisor.
And before becoming a financial advisor, were you at some point a tennis coach in your life?
Yes, I was.
And when did you first start coaching tennis?
1973.
And at that time, were you in Florida or somewhere else?
Lake Placid, New York.
Did you?
Could we adjust the microphone?
Yes, we'll have the bailiff come up here and do that.
You said you began coaching in Lake Placid, New York,
Yes,
and roughly the year
73.
73. And did you coach in other places besides Lake Placid?
Yes, I did.
And what were those places?
After Lake Placid, then after graduating from college, I went to Columbia, South America for 2 years. Then I was in Florida for about 6 months. And then I went to Princeton, New Jersey, and I was there for 5 years.
And do you know roughly the time period that you were in Princeton, New Jersey?
Yes, May of 81 through December of 85.
And during that time period, did you have occasion to meet members of the Menendez family?
Yes, I did.
And could you tell us in what capacity you met them?
The first time was at the Hamilton Tennis Center in Hamilton, New Jersey in May, around the 15th of May. And I met them there when they brought the boys to take lessons.
By the way,
The last time I saw Eric was in March of 85,
all right.
and Lyle was in October of 86.
And is it true that your coaching stopped in 85 and you saw Lyle in 86 because you played tennis with him?
Yes.
Were you an avid tennis player yourself in addition to being a
Yes.
coach? Were you a good tennis player or just
I was ranked.
what?
I was-
Tell a juries what that means.
At that time, I was #1 in the Open Professionals in singles and doubles in New Jersey, and I had also been in the top 100 in the world.
And how much coaching experience did you have when you first came into contact with the Menendez brothers?
To that point, I'd given about 20,000 lessons.
And who was it that hired you to give these lessons to the brothers?
I'd been brought to New Jersey by a guy named Roger Wooten, but Mr. Menendez had hired me through Roger Wooten.
Was the first time you met anyone in the Menendez family Mr. Menendez?
Actually, I met all four of them. All four of them came together to the Hamilton Tennis Center the first time I met them.
And who, if anyone, did the talking in terms of dealing with you?
Mr. Menendez.
And what was the arrangement, if any, that you made with Mr. Menendez?
Well, actually, I was just to give the kids drills and private lessons, but those original arrangements were made through the other guy, Roger Wooten, who was my employer, and then I gave the lessons.
And where would these lessons take place?
In the early stages, it was at the Hamilton Tennis Center, but we were not there long, and then we went to the Nassau Racket and Tennis Club where they continued. And then I also gave them tennis lessons at the Hopewell Valley Tennis Club and at the Hopewell Valley High School and at their house.
And did you, during the period of time that you were giving lessons at those places, come to know the Menendez brothers quite well?
Very well.
And did you also come to know their parents very well?
Not as well as I knew the boys, but I did get to know the parents.
Did you have interactions with Jose Menendez specifically?
A few.
And could you describe for us what the nature of those interactions were?
Well, most of the time it was like debate over technical issues about how tennis should be taught and differing opinions on the way that people should be trained in the sport.
Did you and Mr. Menendez have a basic disagreement on the philosophy of how someone should be taught in the sport?
Yes.
What was his philosophy and what was yours?
Well, his philosophy, as far as I knew, was that the boys should be trained very, very hard and pushed as hard as they could go. And basically, his attitude was that he wanted them to try to do things in the development of their game ahead of what I thought was the chronological order of how someone should be taught and progress.
When they came to you, I'm referring to the brothers, came to you, were they advanced players?
No,
Did Jose Menendez think they were advanced players?
no, they were beginners.
And
They were just starting.
when you say that his philosophy was that he wanted them to progress at a different stage than what you had in mind, what do you mean by that?
I was speaking of, that was after the original meeting. At first, it was just like all the other kids. They were in the program. We had a lot of kids. And so basically, they started out with the other kids at their same skill level, but then they did progress faster, so then we started giving them a little more individual attention.
Did he want you to give them any preferential treatment above the other kids?
Yes.
And how did he indicate that?
He wanted me to give them all my attention.
And did he indicate why he wanted you to give them all your attention?
Just because he wanted it.
Did he indicate why he was pursuing these tennis lessons? Was this
He just wanted them to be good.
for what purpose, though?
Also speculation.
If you know. In other words, if he indicated to you why he wanted them to be good.
The only indication of why he wanted them to be good was that it was family tradition to excel.
All right? And when you say your basic disagreement with him was that he pushed them too hard, did you say?
Yes.
Could you explain to me what you meant by that?
Well, I feel that he thought that
Objection, this is speculation. right?
Sustained.
But without reference to your feelings, could you tell me what he said to you in terms of his philosophy?
that they should just practice as much as possible, and that I should work them very, very hard, and that I should teach what he wanted me to teach.
Was it his philosophy that he was having them taught so that they would enjoy the game as a game, or was there a disagreement about that?
That there was disagreement.
What was the disagreement there?
He wanted them to play for results, and I wanted them to play tennis as a art form and for the beauty of the game.
And who won out in this dispute as to the philosophy of what you were doing there?
I don't know if there was a winner. When they were with me, we did it my way. When they were with other coaches, they did it his way. And then when he was there, when I was teaching them, then we had confrontation.
And could you describe the nature of those confrontations?
Basically, a superioristic attitude that I didn't know what I was talking about. And I was very self-confident at that time and thought that I knew exactly what I was talking about because I'd produced already a couple of world-ranked players, and I didn't want his interference.
By the way, did he have any experience as a tennis coach?
No,
Would he be telling you how to do your job?
he tried.
Pardon?
He tried.
And what was your reaction to that in terms of how you dealt with it?
Well, I told him to stay out of it and let me do the coaching.
And did he?
No.
Would you explain what you mean by that? Were there further confrontations?
Well,
or-
yeah, I'd try to explain to Joe,
You say Joe, is that,
Mr. Menendez, I'm
right.
sorry. I would try to explain to the father how to best train a child so that they can progress and not only win, but also develop as a person.
Did he want you to teach the boys methods of cheating or playing unfairly in the game?
He had me teach them all psychological ways to disrupt the opponents, both subversive and openly.
And is that part of this game of tennis?
No.
I mean, is that the normal way in which the game is played legitimately?
No, but at the top, it is a cutthroat game, and a lot of these parents do that, but it is not the way it should be done.
Was that basically a win at all costs type of attitude that he was conveying to you, or was there some other attitude?
Your Honor.
Or was there some other attitude he was conveying?
Objection overruled.
Go ahead.
Yes, it was, the total focus was put on winning.
And were there other aspects of the game that he would be stressing besides these psychological ploys?
Objection misstates the evidence, Your Honor.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
All right. Was he emphasizing in your disputes with him these psychological ploys that he wanted taught?
Sure.
And besides trying to emphasize that, were there other things that he was insisting that the boys be taught in terms of how the game should be played or
Yes.
what the techniques were of play? Would you describe what those were?
Well, yes, at a very young age, he wanted them to try to play like how they play on TV and hit winners.
Hit winners?
Yes.
Could you describe what that means for those of us who don't know the game?
Hitting a winner is when you hit the ball so hard and to a section of the court that the opponent can't touch it, and it has a very low probability of success.
So why was that not a good thing, if it was not a good thing, to be teaching a kid who was just starting out in the game?
Because they should learn consistency first and conditioning, and then the winners come from running the opponent out of position. And it's a very low percentage, maybe 10%, do you actually hit a ball that the opponent can't touch.
And is it like in baseball where you hit a home run, basically?
Yes.
So he's teaching at that level. He
Right.
wants them to be hitting the home runs right from the beginning.
But on every shot.
And are you basically telling him, let's stick with the basics before you move up?
Right. I was emphasizing consistency, and there is a definite pattern of how you're supposed to play. For instance, hitting the ball from cross court, corner to corner, was basically the first thing you need to learn, both sides. And when I tried to explain that to Mr. Menendez, he just sloughed it off and said, well, that's not the way we're going to do it.
Now, did this basic disagreement between the two of you last throughout the whole 5 years that you were coaching the boys?
Yeah.
And did it eventually end in you being fired by Mr. Menendez?
Yes.
Do you know why you got fired?
Because I stood up to him, and I told him that he needed to back off because he was pushing them too hard, and it was making them unhappy, and it wasn't that I had seen other students not make it because of this type of pressure, and that he should let me do the coaching, and that he should just be the father.
And what was his reaction to you as the coach after teaching them for 5 years, giving him this advice?
He just said I was naive and that I was fired.
And he just dismissed you at that point?
Yes.
Now, during the 5 years that you taught the boys, did you see them and deal with them and interact with them out of the presence of Jose Menendez?
Yes.
What were the boys like, just in terms of their basic personalities and their dealing with you?
Their personalities were good. They were two of my favorite kids. They were nice kids. They were very respectful. They were never disrespectful.
In the game of tennis, are there cutthroat competitor types who play this game?
Definitely.
Relevant?
And were either of the brothers of that type, in your opinion? Just in terms of how they were relating to the game?
No.
How were they different?
They wanted to play the game, I think, the way I wanted them to, but they couldn't.
Why?
because they had to play the way their father wanted them to play.
And what did you see in terms of your impressions of the result of that problem, if I can characterize it at that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
What did you see in terms of their dealing with that situation, in terms of the father wanting them to play one way and you telling them that's not the way to play?
What was their reaction?
Yeah.
Well, they had no reaction. They had to do what he said.
And so is it true that you were coaching them one way, father's telling them to do it the other way, and they're basically following their father?
Yes, I feel that I was coaching them differently than the other coaches even that they had. I believe the other coaches were doing exactly what Mr. Menendez told them to do. He would tell the coach what to do, what to work on, what strokes to practice on, what shots to practice, how long to practice, how hard to run them, and all of that. But I tried to do all that myself.
Now, did either of the brothers ever complain about their parents and the way they were being treated?
Just that they were tired.
Tired?
Yes.
Did you work them hard? Physically work them hard?
Very hard.
And tell me what the routine would be in terms of how you would work them.
Well, we generally practice for 2 hours in a row, and we wouldn't take any breaks, and we would not take water breaks, and I would run them nonstop for 2 hours, working every stroke.
And was that the way that Jose Menendez wanted them worked?
Yes.
By the way, this is in 1981 you began, correct?
Yes.
If Eric was born in 1970, he would have been 11 years old at that time?
Yes.
And if Lau was born in 1968, he would have been 13?
Yes.
And how long did that sort of work schedule maintain itself? Was that through the entire 5-year period?
Yes.
So for 5 years you were working them at that level?
Yes.
Did you, during that period of time, get to know Mrs. Menendez at all?
Yes.
And what impressions did you form of her in terms of her interaction with the brothers?
She was unhappy.
And could you describe why you say that?
Well, she was always, I mean, it was obvious she was always going around with a sour look on her face, and yeah, I could tell that she resented.
Objection, this is speculation.
Sustained. As far as the portion of the answer, I could tell that portion is stricken. Next question.
Could you tell me if you saw her getting mad in the presence of the brothers?
You could tell that she was mad.
And how could you tell she was mad?
She would frown and make ugly faces.
Like what kinds of faces?
Just scowls.
And when would these faces be made? Under what circumstances?
Just about every time I saw her. In every circumstance.
Did she ever express happiness of what she was doing in the circumstances you saw her in?
No.
What were those circumstances? Where would you see her and what would she be doing?
I saw her when she'd bring the kids to and from the club, and when I went to the house, I'd see her there. And those were basically the only two places that I saw her.
And did she seem happy in her relationship with her sons?
No.
Not at all?
No.
Did you ever see her in a happy moment with either Lyle or Eric Menendez during the 5 years that you were connected with that family?
No.
And if you could you characterize her overall mood when you dealt with her?
Usually sarcastic and hostile.
Sarcastic and what?
Hostile?
And in what ways was she hostile?
She was just angry.
At you or at the boys or at something else?
I don't know.
Life in general? Or
I don't know. She was just angry.
how would she,
Upset.
How would she express her hostility?
Usually sarcasm.
Toward you?
Toward anybody, me included.
Including her sons?
Yes.
And how would she express that sarcasm to her sons? Could you give me an example of that?
Well, a lot of times if they asked her a question, she'd humiliate them with sarcasm. Something to the effect like, if you don't know that, you're stupid.
And what kind of questions would they ask? Just the kinds of questions kids at that age
Anything.
ask?
They never got an answer.
And her response would be, when they ask these questions, if you don't know that, you're stupid?
Yeah, or if you don't know that, you're naive.
This is leading.
Overall, you were answering the question. Did you finish your answer?
Yes, sir.
You were stupid or naive.
Yes.
Was that her basic attitude towards you as well?
I didn't think so. I thought she and I had a pretty good relationship, if that was possible.
Did the boys seem different out of the presence of their parents than they did in the presence of their parents?
Yes.
What was the difference?
They had no personality when they were with their parents. And when they were with me, they were nice, normal kids.
No personality in what sense?
Showed no emotion at all.
Were the brothers sophisticated in your view?
Yes.
In what way?
They were classy kids.
Were they immature or mature?
They were mature.
And how about your interactions with Jose Menendez? Did you see him interact with the brothers, with his sons?
I saw him practice with them once in a while.
And what would those interactions be like?
Well, I thought they were ridiculous because he was out there trying to coach them, and he was saying all the wrong things and doing all the wrong things.
Would they be confrontational in any way?
No, not confrontational. They did exactly what he said.
And when you say they did exactly what he said, was there a certain military style to the way in which this family was conducted, or a certain corporate style?
Objection, Mrs. Levy.
Sustained.
If you could you characterize the way the family was run based on your observations of the family during that 5-year period of time?
Yeah. It was run sort of like his business, and he would give the orders and they would follow them.
And are you literally saying he would give orders? Or are
Yes.
How do you mean that?
Well, I mean, they would have tasks in practice, and they were written down, and they had to do it.
And these written orders would be given to them?
They would be given to Mrs. Menendez, and she would carry them out. And then they would have their own, like, do this much studying, do this much practicing, run this many miles on a daily basis.
And these would all be written down by Jose Menendez, and the orders would be transferred to Kitty Menendez?
I don't know who wrote them down.
But in any event, you're actually talking about a piece of paper that
Yes.
someone would have with a list of orders on it?
Yes, tasks.
And those tasks would be followed?
Yes.
Would there be any deviation from the list?
No.
And was that an unusual event where there would be this list of tasks that had to be followed, or was that something that you saw on a regular basis in that 5-year period?
I had never seen it before.
And was it a regular event in this family?
Yes.
Did you ever discuss with Lyle Menendez what his basic philosophy was in terms of his future?
Yes.
Objection, irrelevant.
Overall.
And
Yes.
what did he tell you in that regard?
Well, he wanted to play tennis.
Do we have a time frame for this?
Yes. Well, when did this discussion, in the time frame of 1981 to 1985, can you be a little bit more precise on when you had one or more conversations?
His age, is that okay? When he was about 15, he started talking about goals, career goals.
Okay.
And he wanted to open up a restaurant. He wanted to come out here, as a matter of fact, and he wanted to start a restaurant, and he wanted to follow the family tradition of being successful, and he wanted to do it on his own, and he told me how he was going to do it, and
Do it on his own, in what sense?
he wanted to make it on his own. He didn't want to have any help from his family.
And he referred to the family tradition.
Yes,
Is
there's
that something that you knew, the family tradition?
yes, I heard it often.
Where'd you hear about the family tradition?
From the parents and from the children.
Was the family tradition something that Jose Menendez talked to you about on more than one occasion?
Yes,
Was it something he stressed in his conversations with you?
yes.
Where did you fit into this picture? Were you an employee, part of the family?
With the parents, I was an employee, but with the kids, I felt that we were family.
Did Jose Menendez want you to be known as the coach?
No,
Why not?
I don't know. He took all the credit himself.
What was the relationship that Mr. and Mrs. Menendez had, if you observe the way that they interacted?
It was a strange relationship.
How so?
Just didn't appear to be any, tenderness or loving type of a romantic, passionate type of a deal. It was more of like a business arrangement.
Business relationship, who was the employer and who was the employee?
Not necessarily employer-employee, but he was the boss and she would do what he said.
And in relationship to the brothers, did you ever see any love conveyed to them by the parents?
No,
At any point in time during that 5-year period of time?
no.
Thank you very much.
The examination on behalf of Eric Menendez.
Morning, Mr. Wadlington.
Good morning.
Are you nervous?
Yes.
Yes. Usually when people are rotating in the chair, it means they're nervous. Okay, try to breathe in between answers. It helps.
Okay.
If you could explain to the jurors, I don't know how many tennis players there are there, but assume nobody knows anything about it, okay? If you could explain to the jurors what was wrong, in your opinion, with the way that Jose Menendez wanted these kids coached.
I thought it was cruel.
I'm sorry?
I thought it was cruel
Okay. Why, how is it cruel?
because they had to physically suffer.
And did these kids complain about the physical suffering?
No,
How did you know they were physically suffering?
because I knew how many hours a day they were doing.
And how many hours a day were they doing it?
All their free hours. And all day, both weekend days.
And was it your knowledge that they were playing tennis before they went to school in the morning sometimes?
Yes,
And did you coach them sometimes before they went to school?
yes.
And what time would those kinds of lessons begin?
6 a.m., 6:30.
And was it within your personal knowledge that they were coached immediately after school?
Yes,
Was it within your personal knowledge that they were coached at night?
yes,
And it was in your personal knowledge that they were coached all day long on each weekend day?
yes.
So what free time did they have?
None. We even practiced on Christmas, holidays, every day.
And did you ever, in the times that you were at the home, see them with friends?
Just once.
Once. In 4 years?
5.
5 years. And what was that circumstance?
One time another boy came to practice with Eric.
And was that the only other time you ever saw anyone that appeared to be a friend around either one of them?
Except when my nephew came and played with Lyle for
That
a
was
week.
a friend you were bringing for him.
Yes.
What about on days when one or both of the boys didn't feel well?
Didn't matter.
They had to play and be coached even when they were sick?
Yes.
Did you feel badly about what was happening in this family at the time you were coaching them?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
What were your feelings about what was happening in this family at the time you were
Objection
coaching?
irrelevant.
Sustained.
Why did you continue to coach them if so much that you didn't approve of was going on?
Because I cared for them.
And you're rather emotional about this even now, are you not?
Yes.
Did you feel that somehow your being there was making some kind of difference?
Objection reading.
Sustained.
What did you think your role was?
Objection irrelevant.
Have you finished your question?
Well, I was trying to think of a way to
Have you finished your question?
No.
Okay.
I'll start over. Okay. Did you think that your remaining as their coach had any impact upon Lyle or Eric's well-being?
Yes.
And what impact did you think your being there had?
Well, I thought it was about all they had.
In what sense? What do you mean by that?
As a friend.
Were you affectionate towards them?
Yes.
And how did you demonstrate your affection for them?
We were friendly, and we played non-tennis things, and we played with the pets. We went fishing. We listened to music. We talked about, girls and life and things like that.
When they did well under your training, how did you deal with them?
Objection, this is irrelevant.
Overall.
If they did well on a particular day in a particular practice, what would you say or do?
Well, I always said the same thing, that I'm there, good or bad, I supported them.
Did you
Right.
praise them when they did well?
Not that much,
Why?
because I was not results-oriented.
So you didn't want to set that up as a system.
Right.
Were you ever physically affectionate with them? Did you hug them?
Yeah, hugged them and shook hands, and I'm not a touchy person, but to the extent that I am.
Okay. Now, you said that you never observed anything that appeared like love from the parents to the boys. Was that true of both parents?
Yes.
Did you ever hear any, and I want you to focus for a moment on Mrs. Menendez. Did you ever hear her say any loving, affectionate, praising, supportive, kind, comforting, any of those categories of words to either of her children?
No.
And concerning Mr. Menendez, did you ever hear him speaking in any kindly, supportive, loving, nice tone of voice to his boys?
No.
Did you hear the opposite from either or both of them?
Both.
Objection J.
Sorry.
Overall.
And focusing first on Mrs. Menendez, you've told us about her response to the children if they asked her questions. What other types of things did you hear her say to her sons?
Basically just commands all the time. do this, do that.
And did they do this and that when she told them to?
Yes.
Were you present on occasions? Well, first of all, did you go with the boys to matches when they were competing?
No.
Okay, and you never went to tournaments?
Never with any players.
Okay. So let's talk about then during the training and the teaching sessions. Would they have good days and bad days?
Ability-wise?
Yeah, days when they were performing better, playing better than other, or learning better even than other days.
Yeah, but they almost always did well. I mean, they were good students.
So, and do they always seem to be following your instruction, trying to do what you told
Yes.
them to do? Were they willing students or reluctant students?
They were willing.
Now, were there occasions when they were not playing that well, for whatever reason, when Jose Menendez or Mrs. Menendez were present?
No.
So they never saw them on days they didn't play well?
They always hit the ball well.
Okay. Were there times, however, that in spite of that, one or both of their parents were being critical of what they were doing?
They were always critical.
Now, how would that work if they were playing well? What was it they were being criticized for?
The few shots that they would miss.
So any failure of any kind was criticized?
Yes.
When they would be criticized by their mother, was she specific in the sense that did she seem to understand some of the rudiments of, backhands and forehands and cross courts and stuff I don't know anything about, but I mean tennis stuff?
Not really.
When she would criticize one or both of the boys, would she say, oh, that was a lousy backhand, or that's a terrible serve, or would she focus on the actual performance?
No.
Just be sort of generalized?
Yes.
What about Mr. Menendez when he was criticizing one or both of the boys' performance? Was he specific?
Yes.
Now there are a lot of. Strike that. You said you had given 20,000 lessons before you even met this family, so I take it there's a lot of youngsters out there who were privately coached during the course of your career.
Well, actually, that was hours on the court.
Okay.
Lesson hours.
But focusing on, there's a lot of kids taking tennis lessons, or were during your coaching career.
Yes.
And those kids have parents.
Yes.
And it's true, is it not, some of those parents are pretty overbearing?
Yes.
How would Jose Menendez compare, in your experience, with other tennis parents?
He was one of the worst.
And in families other families you were familiar with, when there's an overbearing tennis parent, is it typical that both parents are overbearing tennis parents?
No.
And was it therefore unusual in your experience in coaching the Menendez brothers that the mother seemed to be as critical and as involved as the father?
It was pretty unusual. Usually the mother was not the dominant criticizer.
And in this family, it's true, is it not, that Mrs. Menendez was around, I mean, as far as number of hours, was around during the day more than Mr. Menendez was?
Yes.
And so, and she was observing a lot of these lessons, was she not?
Yes.
She didn't just go stay in the house and do something while you were coaching the boys.
No.
She was there, involved.
Yes.
So did it turn out that by sheer weight of hours, she was the main criticizer? Just
Yes.
the number of hours.
Yes.
Were you ever there on occasions when Mr. Menendez would be criticizing the boys, where Mrs. Menendez would in any way intervene to protect them?
Never.
Now, you've talked about the fact that the boys seem to have, everybody's getting sick, that the boys seem to have a daily, why don't we take 2 minutes, everybody coughs, a daily list of tasks. Just want to wait till it seems contagious.
All right, your next question, please.
Thank you. You said that the boys seem to have a daily list of tasks that were set out for them by both parents, one parent. Did you know who wrote the list or who originated the list?
Mr. Menendez,
Okay, and Mrs. Menendez was the enforcer of the list, was she not?
yes.
Did she ever allow the boys any deviation from that list, to say if it was very hot, or if it was raining, or if they were sick, or if they didn't feel like it, or anything like that?
No. We, on occasion, practiced in the rain.
Did you ever hear Mrs. Menendez talking about the necessity for the boys to do what was on the list? Don't tell us what she said, but did you ever hear her talk about, oh, they've got to do this and they've got to do that?
Sure.
And did she ever express to you whether her insistence that these things be done was based on fear of her husband versus her own desire that they do this stuff?
No. Sorry.
All right, the answer will remain the objection will.
When you saw Mr. and Mrs. Menendez together, did Mrs. Menendez appear to be fearful of her husband?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Did she look afraid?
No, just unhappy.
Do you remember, Mr. Wadlington, what were the psychological ploys that Jose Menendez wanted you to teach his 11 and 13-year-old sons?
Well, there were many. If it's a big point and the ball hits the line, you'd call it out. So the other guy would get angry, have a little argument, break his concentration.
Let me stop you for a minute for the non-tennis nicks, okay? If the ball hits the line, is it supposed to be called out?
Yes, or if you cannot clearly call it out, it should be played as good.
Okay. The tennis court has these lines, these chalk lines around it?
They're paint.
All right, painted lines around. And in amateur tennis competition, on the level that these boys competed, there aren't those referees and people in funny things like at Wimbledon.
Only for the big tournaments and only for the finals.
Okay, in the smaller tournaments and in the non-finals, the players call the other players' shots.
Correct.
Correct. So if I'm standing in this court and you're in that court and you hit a ball at me, I can see that line, and I'm allowed to call whether the ball's inside like it's supposed to be or outside or on the line.
Correct.
Okay. So one of these ploys was to, in effect, always call the ball on the line out, even when it may be a questionable call. Is that right?
On the baseline or on the first serve.
Okay, and that's to get the other player upset,
Yes.
because he's going to say it was in,
Right.
and he's going to think you're cheating.
Objection, leading.
Sustained.
Well,
Let's move on.
all right. So was that the purpose of that particular ploy?
To upset the opponent.
Okay, what other kinds of ploys?
Stalling techniques to slow the pace of the game down to get the opponent off his game. When the opponent lost track of the score, to change the score in our favor.
Not exactly the rules of good sportsmanship. Would it be fair to say that?
Yeah.
Did you ever hear Mr. Menendez talking to his sons about the importance of good sportsmanship?
No.
Did you?
Yes.
Did you see any difference in the way that Jose Menendez treated his sons? Difference as between the two boys?
Yes, he gave more preference to Lyle.
And in giving more preference to Lyle, did he also express to Lyle higher expectations?
Lyle was the only one that had been given expectations.
Okay. So along with the preference was the expectations.
Yes.
And did it appear to you, looking, that he had little regard for Eric?
As far as a tennis player and whether he should receive the preferential lesson time and to do well, etc., it was given to to Lyle. Excuse me.
Apart from that kind of distinction where Lyle should be given the preferential time, in the way that Jose Menendez related one-to-one to the boys, did he seem to be dismissive of Eric, focus more attention on Lyle?
Yes.
You said one of the activities you did apart from coaching with the boys was to listen to music.
Yes.
Do the words Chippendale mean anything to you?
We listened to a lot of Chippendale. Chippendale singing a lot of modern songs.
What are Chippendale for those who don't know?
They're two cartoon characters that sing in high-pitched, fast voices.
Okay. And was this music the boys' preference?
One of their preferences. We listened to it a lot when I was at the house.
Now, that's not very sophisticated music for teenage boys, is it?
Objection, leading.
Did you think that was a sophisticated choice?
Objection, irrelevant.
You described them as sophisticated. Did you mean socially sophisticated? What did you mean?
Yeah, they were socially sophisticated and well-trained and well-mannered and
Okay.
dressed nice and
All right, so you're talking about they had manners.
yes.
Did they seem to have much knowledge of the world or of people?
Objection, vague. Sustained.
Did they seem to have a wide fund of knowledge?
Objection, vague. Sustained.
Would this Chippendale music be playing while they were practicing?
Yes. Yes.
You said you had been told, or you heard repeatedly from Mr. Menendez's lips and from the boys about family tradition. What were you told was the family tradition?
Well, that the grandparents had won gold medals in swimming and that they should strive for that high a goal and actually to become world champion in tennis.
Did you know, Mr. Wadlington, if this story about the grandparents winning gold medals in swimming was true?
No.
Did you ever see the gold medals?
No.
Were you given the impression that they were Olympic gold medals?
Yes.
Do you know if either of the grandparents were ever even in the Olympics?
Objection, irrelevant.
Sustained.
You said that you were not supposed to be known as their coach and that Jose took all the credit. What did you mean by that? What was he taking credit for?
I don't know. I guess their results or
You mean he was pretending to be their only coach?
Objection, leading.
Sustained.
He was taking credit for what? For coaching them?
for the
Objection, asked and answered.
Overall. You can answer the question.
What was he taking credit for?
The results,
The accomplishments?
yes.
So he didn't let it be known that you were their coach?
No, I was never mentioned in any of the articles or anything like that.
When you talk about the articles, did the local newspapers write up the amateur athletics in the Princeton area?
Yes,
And were both Eric and Lyle Menendez written up when they would win tournaments?
yes,
And did the father give interviews in these articles and make comments?
I don't know.
In these articles, are you saying never mentioned that you were their coach?
No,
Was that unusual in your experience?
Objection is irrelevant.
Sustained.
When you coached other kids who won tournaments, did your name ordinarily appear in the paper?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Was there a time that Eric was suffering from a physical problem with his feet?
yes,
Is it fairly typical in tennis, in rigorous practice, that kids develop problems with their feet?
yes,
And did you attempt to assist him in that problem?
I did help him.
And what was Mrs. Menendez's reaction following your having helped Eric?
We couldn't tell her.
What do you mean you couldn't tell?
We couldn't tell her. He said he would be punished. So we did it on secret.
All right, why don't we get more specific? What was the problem that he was having?
His big toe had a bad ingrown toenail.
And was it bleeding and painful?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. And what did you do about it?
I went to the drugstore and I got some stuff called Outgrow and put it on there and told him to put it on there several times a day, and then eventually he'd be able to clip the nail.
Okay. And he told you that he was afraid to tell his mother about this?
Objection, lady. Suggested.
Rephrase the question, please.
Okay. What did Eric say about this with respect to his mother?
He just said he'd get in trouble if she knew that I helped him and that she wanted to take him to the doctor and let him cut it out.
And was cutting it out, based on your own personal knowledge, painful?
Objection calls for speculation.
Overall.
Yeah, very painful. I'd had them myself, and the Outgrow stuff works, and there's no need to go and get your feet chopped on.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, how long is your cross going to be?
Probably a half an hour, 45 minutes.
All right, so let's take our lunch break and resume at 1:30, ladies and gentlemen. Don't discuss the case with anyone or form any final opinions about it, and we'll resume at 1:30. We'll now resume with the trial. The witness is back on the witness stand, and you have another exhibit to mark.
Yes, Your Honor, I have three photographs, actually, of duplicates of each, so I'm going to mark each set with the same number with the court's permission. The first photograph, duplicate 175, the second 176, and the third 177. And if I might approach.
Yes.
Actually, let's turn this around. I don't think I can reach that, actually. Now, showing you the photographs that have been marked 175, do you recognize who's in those pictures?
Yes,
And who is it?
Eric,
And at approximately what age?
about 12.
And that was during the time that you were coaching him?
Yes,
And if you look at the next photograph, which is 176, do you recognize who's in that picture?
it's also Eric.
At about the same age.
Yes,
Do you notice he has something on his right arm in the wrist area?
his sweatband.
And do you know whether Eric had any marks on him, birthmarks or disfigurements in that area,
A birthmark.
on his right arm? Mm-hmm. Did he usually wear a sweatband over it?
Yes.
And the third photograph, 177, is that also a photograph of Eric?
Yes.
What's he doing?
Yes.
What's he doing?
Hitting a forehand.
And is this a characteristic picture of him playing tennis?
Yes.
At that age? Mm-hmm. He appears, how would you describe his facial expression in this photograph?
Straining.
And was straining typical of the way that he played tennis at 12?
Yes.
Now, when Eric was approximately 14, between 1984 and 1985, did he start to exhibit an unusual type of behavior? You can answer that yes or no, and then I'll give you an opportunity to explain.
Yes, at the end of our time.
This is at the end of your coaching time?
Yes.
There was something about him that was suddenly different?
He was acting funny.
And what do you mean by funny?
Just wasn't, his head wasn't on the court.
Objection to speculation.
Oh, wait.
Let me have the question read back, please.
Question, what do you mean by funny?
Objection rule.
When you say his head wasn't on the court, you're not speaking literally, I take it. You're speaking.
His concentration was elsewhere.
Okay. Did he seem to be having difficulty in self-discipline?
Objection leading and suggestive.
Sustained.
What appeared to be the difficulty, if you could tell us?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Was he all right. What was he doing?
He wasn't paying attention, and he would smash the balls as hard as he could, and they would hit the back fence, so that it was obvious there was no effort to try to get the ball in.
Now, based on your interaction with him, did he appear to be rebellious, or was this unintentional?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Could you figure out what was going on?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
You've coached many children, have you not?
Yes.
You've already described Eric as a very willing student, correct?
Yes.
Was he in any way being defiant towards you, or refusing to listen to you, or any of those things?
Objection calls for speculation. Irrelevant.
Sustained is also a compound question.
Well, may we approach, Your Honor?
No, it's a compound question.
Okay. Was he being defiant towards you?
Objection is vague.
Sustained.
Was he refusing to listen to you?
Yes.
And could you tell why? Was he
Objection calls for
angry?
speculation.
Objection sustained.
Did he appear to be angry?
Yes.
Did he appear to be angry with you?
Was there an objection?
Yes, there was an objection.
What was the objection?
It calls for speculation. It is speculative.
Well, at this point, it's unclear as to, are you talking about one specific incident?
No, I'm talking about a pattern of conduct.
All right, the objection is sustained, the answer is stricken.
On any of these occasions, well, first of all, how many times did this happen before your coaching of him ended?
Just the last couple of lessons.
So it was 2 lessons.
Yes.
All right. Did he appear or express any anger towards you?
No.
Did he appear or express any anger towards anybody?
I couldn't tell what he was acting strangely about.
Why did this seem strange to you?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Did you have a conversation with Eric about this behavior of his?
Yes.
And what did he say?
Nothing.
What did you say?
Objection irrelevant.
Overruled.
I told him that, basically, I told him that I wasn't going to coach him anymore because, one, he was acting so strange, and it was obvious that he wasn't trying, and he wasn't making an effort to stay in the practice, get the balls in, or do any of the things I was telling him to. Mm-hmm. And I was fed up with the whole strain of the whole situation with him, and so I told him I wasn't going to coach him anymore because I didn't want to. I'd had it, and I didn't want to have any problem with the parents anymore, and so I just told him that I wasn't going to be able to coach him anymore.
Did you tell him that it was his fault that you were quitting?
Objection irrelevant.
Objection, unless there was a response that you are attempting to elicit, the objection is sustained. Do you know if there was a response?
I'm trying to get the, well, maybe we just do this. In the letter that you wrote to us in which you set out the dates and times that you coached the boys, did you also set out this conversation with Eric?
Yes.
And did you in that letter write that you had told Eric that it wasn't his fault but that of his parents?
Yes.
And did you believe that his behavior was somehow being caused by his parents?
Objection irrelevant.
Object-
It's special.
Objection sustained.
Have you seen children who basically cracked under too much pressure for athletic competition?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Well, I'd like to approach on this, Your Honor.
All right, you may.
Thank you. Mr. Wadlington, you indicated that when you told Eric that you had basically had it, he didn't say anything. Is that right?
Right.
During these 2 lessons when he was not doing what you were instructing him to do, did he argue with you?
No.
Did he talk back to you?
No.
Was he lippy or mouthy or any of those things?
He didn't say anything.
Did you seek any explanation from him as to what was going on?
No.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Wadlington, the first time that you ever saw the Menendez family was in 1981, is that correct?
Yes.
And you saw Jose and Kitty and Lyle and Eric at that time?
Yes.
And they came in as a family?
Yes.
And was that at the Hamilton Tennis Center?
Yes.
Okay. And at that point, you spoke to the family and arrangements were made for you to give lessons to the defendants in this case?
I didn't speak to the family. It was, the arrangements were made between my employer and the family.
Did you see the family on that date?
Yes, I saw them, but I didn't speak with them.
Okay, after that first time that you saw them come in to arrange for these lessons, how long was it before you actually started to give them lessons?
A few days.
A few days? Now, how many hours per week over this 5-year period did you give lessons to the defendants?
About, on average, about 20 hours.
20 hours per week?
Yes.
Now, you indicated that you did not know the parents very well, is that correct? You testified to that in direct examination.
The objector mistakes his testimony.
Overruled.
Would that be fair to say, sir?
That I didn't know them very well?
Yes.
I didn't know them intimately.
Now, you indicated that Jose Menendez told you that you should train the defendants hard and to push them and develop their game, correct?
He told me specifically what to do when I taught them, and he did want me to train them hard.
And he told you that he wanted you to give a lot of attention to his sons.
He wanted me to give preferential treatment.
He thought his sons were special, and he wanted you to treat them specially.
That's a comment.
Sustain.
Did he think his sons were special?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustain.
In any event, he told you he wanted you to give his sons preferential treatment, correct?
Yes.
Now, you said that, I guess Jose Menendez had told you how to coach his sons. He told you what he wanted done, correct?
Yes.
And you taught them the way that you wanted to. Is that fair to say?
I tried to work in his goals, but with my methods.
And his goals were that his sons would one day be champions in tennis?
Yeah, number one, to be specific.
And you told him to just be their father and you'll be the coach, correct?
Yes.
Now, you were saying that at one point the defendants played in the rain. Was that what you testified to?
Yes.
Now, you were the coach and you did the coaching the way you saw fit, correct?
Yes.
And you coached them in the rain.
Yes.
Jose Menendez wasn't there when they were playing in the rain when you were coaching, was he?
Objection.
I don't-
Negative.
Overruled.
I don't remember if he was there or not.
But that was your call, correct?
Yes.
Now, would it be fair to say that Jose Menendez spent a lot of time with his sons?
I don't know.
Didn't you testify that he spent both days on the weekends practicing with his sons?
No.
You did not.
No.
Did you spend the weekends with the defendants teaching them tennis?
Yes. When they
All-
weren't in tournaments.
All day, both days?
No. Just my allotted time.
And how many hours on the weekends was that?
Usually about 2 or 3 hours a day.
Okay, did you testify that they spent the whole week, all day on the weekends practicing tennis?
Yes.
And you only spent about 2 or 3 hours with them?
Or playing tennis in tournaments.
Okay.
And I knew the other coaches that were coaching them as well.
So there were other coaches in addition to yourself that were coaching them at that point.
Yes.
Was it your understanding that Jose Menendez also spent time with his sons trying to help them in their training?
Object to the form of the question, Your Honor. Assumes facts not known.
Overruled.
He hit with them, but not much. Usually it was with a professional.
And would it be fair to say that Jose Menendez would come to practices often and watch the practices?
No.
No? So you didn't see Jose Menendez that often then?
Not as often as I saw the missus.
Did you ever go to any tournaments that the defendants were in?
No. With any students, I wouldn't go to the tournaments.
Now, you spoke of Jose talking of his family's tradition of champions and of success, correct?
Yes.
And he told you that he came from Cuba when he was 14 or 15 years old?
Yes.
And he told you that he had to make it in this country the hard way?
Yes.
And he wanted to be successful in this country?
Yes.
And he told you that he wanted his sons to live the life the way he wished his life had been?
No.
Is that what you, do you remember talking to the defense attorneys in this case?
Sure.
And that was on January 19th, 1993?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Do you recall telling the defense attorneys that Jose Menendez wanted... Just a second.
Yeah, we have that exhibit. This letter, it was 174. 174.
Just a minute, counsel. But it's on the second page, the fourth full paragraph, and the last part of that statement.
You gonna read that?
Yes. Mr. Wadlington, do you remember telling the defense attorneys in this case that Jose tried to make the children live life his way, or as he would have wished his life to have been? Did you make that statement, sir?
Would you read it again?
Yes. Jose tried to make the children live life his way, or as he would have wished his life to have been.
Yep. What I said, and I think that's a paraphrase of what I said, is that he was trying to make them live a life of athleticism, which he had wanted to live but hadn't. He was trying to live his life through them.
He wanted his sons to succeed where he had not?
In sports.
Now, you indicated that the defendants were good, they were your favorite kids, they were nice kids.
Yes, they were.
correct? Respectful,
Yes.
sophisticated and mature and well-mannered,
Yes.
nicely dressed.
Yes.
Would it be fair to say that the parents did a great job of teaching the defendants to be respectful of their elders and to be well-mannered?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. Call for conclusion.
Sustained.
Now, you did not testify as to how you had to discipline the defendants, did you?
I'm going to object to the questioner's argumentative.
Rephrase the question, please.
Yes, Your Honor. During this period of time, sir, did you ever have to discipline the defendants when you were training them?
No.
Not one?
Just the time when I told Eric that I didn't want to coach him anymore.
That was the only time in this 5-year period that you ever had to tell him that you didn't want to coach him anymore?
Right.
Do you remember the same interview with the defense counsel on January 19th, 1993? It's page 1, the 7th paragraph. Where, you have it? Where you said that you sometimes disciplined the defendants, them, because they got mouthy on the tennis court. Do you remember that?
No.
You don't remember that?
No.
Did you ever tell the defense attorneys that?
I don't think so.
Would it refresh your present recollection to take a look at this report?
No.
It would not.
I remember talking to them,
Okay. If it were in this
but
report?
I don't think that I ever had to discipline them in any. I don't remember them ever being unruly, except just that time. They were very disciplined kids. They didn't misbehave.
If it appears in this report, would that have been inaccurate?
Objection, Your Honor. It's calling for speculation.
Objection sustained.
Is it your testimony right now that you never had to discipline the defendants ever in this 5-year period that you coached them?
I don't think that discipline is the proper word. I try to teach them the proper etiquette, but it wasn't as if they were misbehaving and I had to come down on them or something. I didn't do that.
If they were, as you put it, mouthy on the tennis court, what would you do?
I just remind them that they shouldn't. For instance, if they said a bad word, I would tell them that you can't say that bad word and tell them why.
And would they say bad words on the tennis court?
Sometimes, but not very often.
Now, the defendants were, I believe you stated that in the report that they were aggressive tennis players.
I'm going to object to what's said in the report.
Objection sustained. Why don't you ask the question directly?
Were the defendants aggressive on the tennis court?
As in the way that they were playing, or do you mean like aggressive to the other person, or I don't really.
In any way.
They were aggressive as far as they were taught to an attack game and to try to move to the net and to be aggressive in that manner.
And they were big, strong athletes, weren't they?
Objection, Your Honor. 11 and 13.
Well, why don't you rephrase the question to relate to the time frame?
Okay. During this period of time, between 1981 and 1985, Lyle Menendez was 13 to 17 years old, correct?
Yes.
And Eric Menendez was 11 to 15 years old, correct?
Okay.
Were they big, strong athletes?
They were in pretty good shape, but they weren't really strong. They didn't have that much stamina, but they were in good. They were in good shape as far as they weren't fat and they were toned, but they weren't what I classify as a big, strong athlete.
Were they well-developed and well-trained athletes?
Objection, call for conclusion.
Overruled.
They were. I'm sorry. Would you
Yes.
specific?
Were they well-developed and well-trained athletes?
Talking about physically?
Yes.
They were pretty well developed and they were well trained.
In fact, you had testified that you were the #1 professional player in New Jersey during that period of time, correct?
Yes.
And Lyle Menendez could beat you, correct?
That was our last meeting, which was about 2 years after I had attained that ranking. Not to diminish his skill level, but he did play very well the last time we played, and he beat me.
Were they mediocre players?
No, they were good players.
In fact, they were the #1 players in the Middle States Tennis Association, weren't they?
The last year that I was there, I don't know what Eric's ranking was, but Lyle was. Or top 2 or 3, I'm not sure. There was another couple of kids that were also up there. I don't remember. I have the ranking book, but I don't remember.
Do you remember telling the defense attorneys on this January 19th, 1993 occasion that they were #1 in the Middle States Tennis Association?
I remember telling them that they were one of the top ranked, but I didn't know if Eric was #1 or not because I wasn't following him that closely at the time.
You had indicated that the defendants were willing students of yours, correct?
They had good attitudes.
And you testified that they wanted to play tennis, they weren't forced to. Be fair to say?
No, they wanted to, but they were also forced to.
Did you testify in direct examination that they were not forced to?
No.
I have to discharge the question and answer it.
It was a question, and the witness answered it. The objection overruled.
Now, at one point during your testimony in direct examination, sir, you said that you had a good relationship with Mrs. Menendez, correct?
I tried to have a good relationship. I wanted to have a good relationship with her.
Now, she brought the defendants to the practices early in the morning, correct?
It varied. Usually we practiced after school.
Okay, would she bring them to practice?
Sometimes. Sometimes I picked them up from school.
Okay. And when you had practices with the defendants on the weekends, what were the arrangements?
Same normal arrangements. Depending on where we were practicing, they would be dropped off, or she would sit up in the gallery and we would practice. Or sometimes I'd go to their house, but she was inside and we would practice at the house.
These practices where you said she would sit up in the gallery, would she sit up watching her two sons play for hours at a time?
She would watch the entire practice.
She spent a lot of time looking after her sons,
Objection
didn't she?
form of the question on a calls for conclusion.
Objection sustained.
Was this on a fairly regular basis that she would bring her sons and she would sit up there for hours at a time watching the practice?
Yes, either she was the transportation or I was the transportation.
Now, sir, you said that in 5 years that you saw Mrs. Menendez, you did not see her smile one time. Is that correct?
Yes.
Not once.
No.
And you never heard her ever say one little kind word to either defendant. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, when Mrs. Menendez sat up in this gallery for hours at a time, what did she do?
Watched or read? I don't know. I wasn't watching her. I was playing tennis. You couldn't see her very well. She could see the court, but I was down inside the screens, so I really couldn't tell what she was doing.
She wasn't sitting up there booing the defendants, was she?
I have no idea what she was doing.
Did she throw rotten tomatoes at
Your
them?
Honor, I'm going to object to this.
All right, it is argumentative.
Okay.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
Mr. Wadlington, you had testified that a lot of your students had overbearing parents, correct? That wanted them to succeed, wanted them to be the best. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Were there other students that you had where you didn't see both parents? Or maybe you would see just one parent?
Usually, unless it was I saw usually both parents, unless it was, of course, a single parent home.
Your Honor, could the court ask the witness to back up a few
Yeah,
inches from
if
the
you
mic?
just do that.
Popping.
Otherwise, you're makes a popping sound. Sounds like a ball machine, actually.
Not quite.
Mr. Wadlington, I believe your testimony was that with respect to the overbearing parents that you saw, that Jose was one of the worst. He was one of the most demanding. Is that right?
He was what I considered the worst parent of the people that I had coached. And most of the high-achieving students' parents were demanding, but he took it a step further.
Now, was he the harshest or most demanding parent that you had ever been involved with?
He was the harshest person I'd ever met.
Okay. Isn't it true that your own father was even harsher than Jose, and you received abusive behavior from your father? Isn't that correct?
My father was not as bad as Mr. Menendez, but he was pretty abusive.
Now, did you tell the defense attorneys, you explained that your own father was even harsher than Jose was?
No, he trained me harder. He trained me harder,
Okay,
but he was not emotionally harsh as harsh as Jose. He had a soft side to him, and after he had been mean or something, or driven me a little too hard, he would come back and talk to me later and apologize and explain himself.
so your father trained you as well.
Object, that's argumentative.
Sustained.
Did you use the words in explaining?
Counsel, could you cite us to what you're
Yes, it's the first page of your report.
Well, don't
1,
remind
2,
me.
3, 4, 5 paragraphs down.
Counsel, you're excused.
All right, why don't you
Jan-
just is there a date on this?
Yes, January 19th, 1993.
And
5th paragraph, first sentence. Mr. Wadlington, didn't you tell the defense attorneys that your own father was even harsher than Jose was?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to counsel stopping there unless he reads the rest of that paragraph.
Did you want to be heard on that, Mr. Kuriyama?
Or at least the next sentence.
I'll finish the paragraph.
All right.
now. You also comment, first of all, do you agree that you stated that?
Objection, that's argumentative.
Overruled.
I object that it's completely out of context and not referenced in the next sentence.
Well, he's going to read the next sentence, so let's start one thing at a time.
With respect to that sentence I just read, did you say that?
Could you read it again?
Yes. It reads this way, quote, he explained that his own father was even harsher than Jose was.
Your Honor, I think without the next sentence.
All right, no, first of all, assuming there's more to it in that sentence, did you say that part of it?
Not in that manner.
Okay.
What I said was that my father had driven me physically harder, that I trained harder, that I worked harder, that I had to run more, hit more balls, do more physical training. And that's, and he was, you know, he was hard on me, but not in the emotional sense.
And you told Jose Menendez that he was being too hard on his sons?
Objection, Your Honor, I was going to read the rest of the sentence.
Yeah, you indicated you would read the rest of that, Mr. Kurtain.
Mr. Wadlington, listen to this. He also commented that, and this is referring to you. I'm sorry, counsel. May I
Yes,
do this?
let's not interrupt. Let's not interrupt, and one person is questioning the witness. If counsel has an objection, address it to the court.
He also commented, though, that in his family there was love from both his father and mother. He felt that that helped to offset some of the more abusive behavior that he experienced at the hand of his father. Did you make those statements?
There's a further statement, Your Honor, which places it in context, so I think it's a misleading question.
I mean, something after that?
Your Honor, I read that
Okay, well,
entire paragraph.
Let's do one thing at a time here, and that was the question of Mr. Kuriyama. Do you remember saying that to the lawyers when you spoke to them?
Can you read it again?
Sure.
You explained that your own father was even harsher than Jose was. You also commented, though, that in your family there was love from both your father and your mother, that you felt that helped to offset some of the more abusive behavior that you experienced at the hand of your father.
That's pretty much what I said, but if you keep in mind that it was without an emotional abuse type thing. It was more of a physical driving type harsh behavior. He didn't insult me, you know, I mean.
Okay, so Mr. Menendez wasn't the harshest person you had ever seen
Objection.
with respect to tennis. Is that fair to say?
Overruled.
No, he
Okay.
was the harshest person I'd ever met.
Now, there are differing coaching techniques, would that be fair to say?
Many.
And Jose had one and you had another, correct?
Well, Jose's was what he read in Tennis Magazine, and he was never a player, so he had no basis for an opinion.
As a father of the defendants, he had his own technique that he wanted you to implement with his sons. Is that fair to say?
Right, he would read something and then he would try to tell me to coach them in that manner.
So you would agree that there are differing ways, differing techniques in coaching?
Objection, yes, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Now, you testified with respect to Lyle Menendez that you spoke to him about his philosophy at 15 years of age, when he was 15 years old, correct?
We talked about his goals.
And you said that he told you, Lyle Menendez told you that his goal was to open a restaurant, be successful on his own,
Yes.
and he did not want his father to control him.
That mistakes the testimony.
Sustained.
Did Lyle Menendez tell you that he didn't want his father to control him, he wanted to do it by himself?
No, he said that he didn't want to use his father's money. He wanted to do it, he wanted to make his own money, that he didn't want help. He was independent. He wanted to prove that he could do it on his own.
So he wanted to succeed by himself.
Yes.
Okay, there was other testimony, Mr. Wadlington, where you said that on these few times that you saw Jose and Kitty Menendez, that they were not passionate.
Objection,
Correct.
that mistakes the testimony.
Sustained.
Did you testify that, in your opinion, Jose and Kitty Menendez were not passionate?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
If I use that word, then I use that word. My statement was that I didn't see a good relationship, a normal, healthy husband-wife relationship.
When you say passionate, what are you talking about?
desire and love and kindness and touching and hugging and that kind of stuff.
Now, Mr. Wadlington, you testified in direct examination that you're not a touchy person, correct?
Not to boys.
Well, okay. Would it be fair to say that you're not demonstrative out in the public? I mean, do you make out with your wife in public or what?
Objection, Your Honor, that is fine.
Objection sustained.
Okay. What did you mean by this wanting them to be passionate in public?
Objection, Your Honor, the witness never said he wanted them to.
Objection, okay, let's not argue, just
Okay.
objection assumes facts, not in evidence. Objection sustained.
Okay. Now, you also testified that in the 5 years that you coached the defendants, that you never saw the parents support the defendants or care for the defendants? Is that what you said?
No. I said I never saw them give love, hugs, kindness, tenderness.
Okay.
They supported them financially and all of that, but there wasn't that typical family-loving Ozzie and Harriet type thing.
When you say that they supported them financially and all of that, what do you mean by all of that?
They gave them all the physical needs, but they didn't give them any emotional fulfillment or needs.
Isn't it true that the parents would sit up for hours on end in the gallery and watch their children? Would that be support in your opinion?
Objection, Your Honor, that is.
Sustained.
Do you consider support of the parents that they spent time watching their children from the galleries on hours on end? Do you consider that to be support?
Not emotional support.
What kind of support is that?
That's a physical support. They're there to let them have a tennis lesson. It has nothing to do with building a relationship with your child.
Isn't it true, sir, that the defendants had a very close relationship with each other and with their family?
They had a close relationship with each other. I don't know what their relationship was with their family.
Do you remember telling the defense attorneys on January 19th, 1993, that the defendants had a very close relationship? Yes. Page... Actually, it's the fourth page of the packet, and it's March 12th, 1993. It's the first page of the March 12th, 1993 report. 6 paragraphs down. Mr. Wadlington, do you recall saying that the defendants or the boys had a very close relationship with each other and with their family? They never complained about their parents at all. Do you remember telling the defense attorneys that?
I remember saying that they never complained, but I don't remember saying when I said they had a close relationship with each other that they had a close relationship with their parents, because I didn't know. I never saw that. I never saw any relationship.
Would it refresh your present recollection to take a look at this report?
No, I remember.
So if you would have said it that day, it would have been inaccurate?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
I'm saying I don't remember saying that they had a close relationship with their parents.
Do you remember saying that they had a close relationship with each other and with their family?
No, I don't. I just remember saying that they had a close relationship.
Now, with reference to the psychological ploy of trying to get your opponent off his timing, would that be the sort of thing that John McEnroe does?
Well, we don't know. There are two theories. One is that he's a prima donna and it happens spontaneously, and then there are those that argue that he does it as a psychological ploy.
Okay.
Why don't you back up?
Oh, sorry.
Sir, you had indicated that at one point Eric Menendez had a serious problem. He had an ingrown toenail, correct?
Yes.
Informative question.
And
Excuse me.
Objection overruled. Cancel the stand.
And you got medicine for Eric Menendez, and he told you not to tell his mom because she would want to take him to the doctor. Is that your testimony?
Yes.
Are you a medical doctor?
No.
Argumentative.
Overruled.
You're not?
No.
Now, he indicated to you that Mrs. Menendez wanted to get him proper medical aid by taking him to a doctor for this treatment of this situation, correct? Is that
Yes.
right?
That she would take care of it.
Now, you testified, sir, that you were fired because you stood up to Jose and you told him to just be a father and let you be the coach, correct?
Yes, because I confronted him that day.
Now, you also indicated that you told the defendants that you were going to stop teaching them because Eric was a discipline problem. Isn't that correct?
No. I told him I wasn't going to coach him anymore because I couldn't handle the whole situation and that I wasn't going to be blamed for his non-performance.
At that point, he was a discipline problem to you, wasn't he?
Well, he just wasn't, I don't call it a discipline problem to me. He just wasn't doing what I wanted him to do, and I wasn't going to tolerate him not trying. He wasn't trying, and it was obvious, and I had too many other people wanting my time, and I wasn't going to spend it with him if he was going to act like that.
So you had indicated that he was not trying anymore and that you were fed up with the situation. You would not coach him anymore. You told him that, correct?
Yes.
I have nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Mr. Wadlington, you were asked whether the Menendez parents and their children came into you and they came in as a family. Did this appear to you to be an ideal family throughout the 5 years that you had contact with them?
Objection vague as to the ideal family.
Sustained.
Mr. Curry, I may ask you whether it was true that they referring to the family, came into you as a family. Do you recall that question?
Yes.
Did they present themselves as a family in the way that people think of families?
Vague, Your Honor. Objections?
It is vague.
All right.
Sustained.
Do you have an idea of someone coming to you as a family, as coming to you as a group of people who are harmonious and presenting themselves as a family unit?
Objection again, vague.
I think the witness understands that, Your Honor.
Right, it's, what did you mean by family? Like, that's basically what they're asking.
As a group.
And after that first time when they met you as a group, did they, in your eyes and in your experience, remain as a group as defined by someone working together, a group of people working together in some way?
Objection again, this is vague. Speculative.
Overall. Do you understand the question?
Yes, sir. I can't remember them, again, together at one time like that. It was either Kitty and the boys, or Joe and the boys, or the boys.
And who did the talking when this group came into you when you first met them?
Mr. Menendez talked to Mr. Wooten.
All right. And I think you said that you gave an approximation of 20 hours per week that you were actually training them?
When I coached them for an extended period, it would be 20 hours a week. But for some reason, they would come to me for a while, and then they were also going to a couple of other pros in the area at the same time, and then they would stop for a couple of months or a week and go to some other pro for a while, and so it varied. But if they were with me the whole time for one whole week, then we usually did about 20 hours. If they weren't in a tournament. If they were in a tournament on the weekend, then I would have them about 10 hours.
And so you were aware that they were being trained by other people at the same time that you were devoting that approximately 20 hours a week to them?
Yes.
And was that the basis for your testimony on direct examination, that they were pretty much working full-time at tennis?
Yes, I knew the other coaches that they were going to, and none of us had enough time to give them all the time that they were demanding, and neither did we have the energy to keep up with them.
By the way, was the tennis community, and by that I mean the coaches, a fairly tight-knit group of people in this area?
Yes.
Would you talk to the other coaches about your experience with the Menendez family?
Sometimes.
And would they talk to you about their experience with the family?
Sometimes.
And you testified as to your reasons for leaving the job on cross-examination. Did Mr. Menendez's reputation in the tennis community have anything to do with your leaving?
Overruled.
No, I didn't care about what other people thought. I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. The other coaches had...
Okay, you've answered the question.
What was his reputation in the community in which he operated in with these tennis people as to being problematic?
Most of the coaches and the club owners disapproved of his methods and didn't get along with him, and there was some problems.
Was he well known as a problem parent? Not only by you, but in this community of tennis coaches?
Yeah, he was known as a problem, as a pain.
You said that he was the worst person you'd ever dealt with.
Objection misstates the law.
Sustained.
You said he was the harshest person you had ever dealt with, correct?
Commissioner, I believe that misstates the law.
Overruled.
Yeah.
And how many parents had you dealt with in your coaching career up to the point in time when you started dealing with the Menendez family?
A lot. Well over 1,000.
1,000 parents?
Yeah, sets.
Sets of parents. All right. And in that group of 1,000 parents, would it be fair to say that there were some overbearing parents?
Sure.
And is it also fair to say, based on what you testified, that Jose was the harshest among that 1,000 parents that you personally dealt with in a coaching situation?
Yeah. Yes.
Is there some doubt about that in your mind?
No, I had to think of them all.
All right. You were asked about certain statements that you made to the lawyers in this case, and you were read parts of the statement that you made about a specific topic regarding the father, and I want to read to you what I think is a full statement and ask you whether this isn't the full context of this statement.
All right, just without your commenting on it.
Do you remember when you talked to the lawyers in the case on January 19th, 1993, making the following statement? He, meaning you, said that he spent a lot of time trying to counteract what he thought were the erroneous messages being transmitted by Jose. I'm in the third paragraph of the January 19th statement.
Which page?
Page 1, third paragraph.
Michael?
I remember making the statement to the lawyers on January 19th, 1993. He, meaning you, said that he spent a lot of his time trying to counteract what he thought was the erroneous messages being transmitted by Jose. He clearly hated Jose and saw in him behavior he considered destructive. He explained that his own father was even harsher than Jose was. He also commented, though, that in his family there was love from both his father and his mother. He felt that that helped to offset some of the more abusive behavior that he experienced at the hands of his father. He contrasted this experience...
Objection, Your Honor, at this point, may approach.
All right.
or or love by either parent. Was that the full context of the statement that was drawn to your attention by the prosecution?
Yes, except I think hate is not the word. I just couldn't stand the guy. But I didn't hate him. I just didn't like him. I mean, that was just like, when I hate your guts or something like that. But I didn't hate him. I just couldn't stand him because I saw him being mean to the boys.
Right. You were also read a part of a statement, and this is counsel on page 3 of the same statement. And does reading that refresh your memory as to the context that remark came up that was referred to by the prosecution?
Yes.
And is it true that you were discussing with the lawyers and the fact that did you say to the lawyers in reference to that remark which was brought out by the prosecution that...
Yes, you can ask him the context in which that statement was made. I think the appropriate.
Can you, from your memory and after looking at this to refresh your memory, tell us what the context of the conversation was?
Sure. That he was trying to live that he wanted to accomplish through the boys sports success that he had not had. That he wanted to live his life through them, so to speak.
And would he talk ad nauseum about the family history?
Objection sustained. It's argumentative. Assumes facts, not evidence at this point.
Would he talk to you about the family history in the context which you just related?
Yes.
Overall.
And would he just mention that briefly, or was that a constant theme with him?
It wasn't a constant theme, but it was mentioned often.
And was it mentioned in the process of demanding unreasonable physical things from the children, or in some other context?
I don't think it was to get physical things from the children. I think it was just to keep reminding them that they were going to have to obtain those high ranks and successes and gold medals and everything like that because it was a family tradition.
You were asked whether or not it was true that Jose Menendez stated to you that one of his goals was that they be #1 in tennis, correct?
In the world.
Yeah, and did he indicate that that was for the boys' benefit or for his own benefit or someone else's?
He didn't indicate that it was for anyone's specific benefit. It sure wasn't the boys' benefit, whatever was his reasoning.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken.
Did Jose Menendez state to you that his goal of making or having the boys be #1 was for their own benefit or their own good in any way?
No.
And did you form an impression based on your contact with that family for that 5-year period as to whose goals he was furthering in trying to make them #1?
Objection calls for speculation.
Rephrase the question, please.
Did you form an opinion based on your contact with that family for 5 years as to whose goals he was furthering?
Objection, improper opinion.
Objection sustained.
You were asked if the kids were aggressive on the court, correct?
Yes.
And you were asked whether Jose Menendez was trying to help them in their training. Do you remember that question?
Yes.
Would he physically intimidate them in any way when he was on the court with them in your presence? And by that I mean by his bearing or anything else.
Sustained.
Did you see him on the court in physical contact or in close contact with the boys in your presence?
Overall.
Yes, he would get them off to the side and get up in their face and get down, get over them. He was a big man, and he'd like get right up and look down on them, and in a very soft, calm, which seemed kind of a threatening voice, say you had to do this or that.
Sorry?
Speculation, motion to strike the last word.
Yes, the objection is sustained. The answer is stricken in regards to the nature of, well, I'm going to strike the whole answer because it's really impossible to edit it, so you can re-ask the question.
Right.
Objection sustained, the answer is stricken.
Did you see Jose Menendez in physical contact with either of the Menendez boys on the tennis court or off the tennis court? Between the period of time that you dealt with them, 1981 and 1985?
Overall.
Yes.
And could you describe how he would physically be in contact with them? Just your observations of how he related to them physically when you saw him in these situations.
Yes, he would get very close to them and loom over them and tell them what they should do.
And would he tell them what they should do in a soft, soothing voice or in some other manner of voice?
A soft voice, but not soothing. More of a ominous, soothing voice.
And by
Objection is the last part of this.
All right, everything from the word more to the end is stricken as conclusion.
did he use a tone of voice that to you was threatening?
Objection is irrelevant.
Sustained.
Did he attempt to intimidate you physically on the court in the presence of the boys?
Yes.
How would he do that?
He'd try to get up and loom over me.
And how physically would the boys act in his presence when he was doing this?
Sort of like in a trance.
Could you...
Just like showing no emotion, like just spaced out and, not moving. Just.
As you said that, you moved your eyes in some way. Did you mean to indicate by that that they had some sort of a look on their face?
Yeah, they look like afraid. No just like robotic type.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Any examination on behalf of Eric Menendez?
One subject, two questions.
Right.
First question. Mr. Wadlington, do you think you could demonstrate for us the tone of voice that Jose Menendez would use when he was looming over and in the face of the boys? That's the first question. You can answer that yes or no. Either you think you can or you don't think you can.
I can try.
Okay. Would you do that?
Well, let's see if I can think of an example.
Okay.
He would say something to the effect of, and they'd be off by themselves, but I could still overhear a bit of it, and he would say like, if you don't do what I tell you to do, you're not going to do what you want to do, and you're not going to be number one. And you don't want that, do you? You don't want to not do your best. You want to make sure that you accomplish your goals, things like that. It sort of it wasn't a, can I give the alternate of what I think he should, no?
Sure.
No, you're just giving you've just attempted to replicate what you said was his speech pattern, is that right?
Okay, yes, sir.
Now, did he have a very low tone of voice when he wanted one? Would he use a very low tone of voice?
In these instances, that was a specific tone.
A special tone reserved for those instances?
Objection, mistakes the evidence. It's leading and suggestive.
Sustained.
Do you mean there was a tone that you only heard during these kinds of incidents?
Yes.
And when he would be using it, where would he be looking?
right down in their eyes,
And
over
would,
them.
And would they be looking up into his eyes?
I don't think that they could look at him. I think they sort of looked at his neck.
Okay. So they couldn't see up into his eyes?
They could have if they would have looked up, but I think that they were scared.
Did they look?
All right, the objection is sustained. The last part of the answer regarding he thinks they were scared is stricken as a conclusion.
How did they look? With respect to their emotional state, when he's doing this, how did they look? Did they look scared? Did they look happy? Did they look what?
Sustained.
Can you detect when someone, can you detect fear on someone's face?
Yes.
Could you detect fear?
Well, I'm going to sustain the objection. It calls for speculation by the witness.
Do you ever go to horror movies, Mr. Wadlington?
Sustain. Let's move on to something else.
Could you tell by looking at their facial expressions, their body language, the way they held themselves during these years that you coached Eric and Lyle when they were afraid?
Sustained.
But, Your Honor,
Counsel, let's not argue it. Go on to something else.
did that tone of voice that Jose Menendez used appear to get results from his children?
Yes.
When he would talk to them that way, would they then proceed to do exactly what he told them?
Yes.
Okay, we'll take a recess. We'll resume at 20 minutes to the hour. Don't discuss this case with anyone or form any final opinions about it.
Can you call Bill Kurtain, Your Honor?
My name is William Kurtain. My last name is Kurtain.
Mr. Kurtain, could you tell the juries what you do for a living, please?
I'm the owner of the Hopewell Valley Tennis Club in Pennington, New Jersey, and I'm a member of the tennis advisory staff of Prince Manufacturing.
And for a certain period of time, have you been a coach of tennis?
Yes, for approximately the last 20 years.
And how old were you when you first started coaching?
I was about 20 years old when I started.
And can you tell me approximately what year that was that you started?
I would say 1973.
1973. And in approximately 1978, were you coaching tennis in New Jersey at that time?
Yes, I was.
Where were you coaching in approximately 1978?
At the Hopewell Valley Tennis Club.
And about, I'm not asking you for an exact amount, but how many kids, first of all, what is the age range that you teach coaching?
You mean in general or back then, or?
Well, first, in general.
It varies. I work with a lot of junior players, but I also work with adults.
And junior players being 18 and under?
Yes.
And how about back then? What were you concentrating on, if anything?
70% of the lessons I gave were to junior players.
And about how many parents, how many kids were you coaching back then?
Well, I teach between 12 and 1,500 lessons a year. And, like I say, about 60% of that was juniors, but I was also in a position to, I was the head of the teaching staff at our club, and there are 9 pros there. So I dealt with literally hundreds of kids and parents every year.
Okay, and the parents you would have contact with through the tennis lessons? They would get involved in the lessons?
Yes.
Did you, back in approximately 1978, come into contact with either one of the defendants in this case, Eric and Joseph Lyle Menendez?
I came in contact, I was given lessons to Lyle, and I also came in contact with both Mr. and Mrs. Menendez.
And who, if there was one that you started coaching first, who did you coach first?
It was Lyle.
And was that in approximately 1978 that you started?
Yes, it was.
Under what circumstances did you begin to coach him?
Just under a private lesson situation.
And who arranged the lessons?
Jose did.
And how did that take place?
He and Kitty, actually the whole family, joined our...
If you could refer to these people by their names, Mr. and Mrs. Menendez.
Okay, I'm sorry. Mr. and Mrs. Menendez and the whole family joined our club. They had moved to the Pennington area and joined our club. So he came in and requested that I work with Lyle.
And what specifically did he request? What was your understanding of what you were to do with Lyle?
Well, we have a consultation type program that we offer to the parents when kids come into our junior instruction program. And in that consultation program, we explain what our goals are for kids and what our program is all about. And he didn't take time to...
Let me ask you this. What goals
All
did...
right, wait. An objection is sustained, the answer is stricken. Why don't you rephrase the question?
Thank you. Can you tell me what goals you explained to Mr. Menendez in terms of how you ran the program?
At that age, at around the age of 10 years old, it was, we work on basic strokes development of the kids. We try to make tennis very fun for them and keep them motivated.
And what were his goals, if any, that he shared with you at that time?
I specifically remember he said that I couldn't work Lyle too hard. In other words, he wanted me to really work him physically hard on the court. And he talks about...
Excuse me, you couldn't work him too hard, meaning that he was asking you not to work him too hard?
No, just the opposite, that he wanted me to work him very hard, physically. And he made reference not so much to winning, but to rankings. He had set goals for, to get ranked in regional tournaments and so forth, which is directly related to winning because you don't get ranked if you don't win.
And how old was Lyle at this time?
Approximately 10.
And after Mr. Menendez explained to you what his goals were and that he had specific ideas in mind for ranking, how did the lessons then proceed?
Well, I worked with Lyle both at the tennis club in the winter months, and I also worked with him at their home on their private court outside in the summer months. And when he was in town or when he was done work, he oftentimes came to the court.
This was to observe the practices, during practices?
No, he would actually join in. He would come out on the court, which was somewhat unusual. It was very unusual.
Why was that unusual?
Because most of the parents might come and observe a lesson for a short period of time, but I wasn't allowed to actually coach. I mean, I would go out there, that was my job, but he would come out on the court, he would literally walk to the other side of the court, and he was very cordial. He would just interrupt and say, "Excuse me," and he would go to the other side of the court and start giving instruction to Lyle while I was doing the lesson.
And this was while you were supposed to be giving him the lessons as the coach, correct?
That's right.
Did that create a certain amount of tension between you and Lyle and Lyle Menendez and Mr. Menendez?
Yes, it did.
Sustained. Answer straight.
Did that situation that you've just described create a certain amount of tension between yourself and Mr. Menendez?
Yes, it did.
And could you explain why and what the tension was?
Well,
Objection, this is irrelevant.
Sustained.
Did the situation which you've just described cause a certain amount of tension which took place in the presence of Lyle Menendez?
yes, it did.
And could you explain what that tension was that took place in the presence of Lyle Menendez?
Lyle seemed to be both embarrassed and resented what was being told to him
Resented what was being told to him by you or by Mr. Menendez?
by Mr. Menendez.
And what sorts of things were being told to him in your presence that he seemed to be embarrassed by?
They were instructional things regarding tennis. In other words, he basically took over my lesson, essentially.
Did Mr. Menendez, seem to know what he was talking about in terms of conducting the instruction?
I didn't think so. He himself was an average club player. He read a lot about tennis and tennis magazines and tennis books, and he would take that information and bring it to the court and use it in his own coaching manner.
Well, what sorts of coaching techniques would he teach Lyle Menendez?
They were very basic concepts. Teaching tennis has come a long way since get your racket back, bend your knees, and keep your eye on the ball. And, Lyle was a very talented athlete, and there were a lot more things that we could do with him that I had planned to do that Mr. Menendez was just working on basic concepts of get your racket back and keep your eye on the ball, which was...
Did you see Mr. Menendez physically confront in any way Lyle while these lessons were taking place, or physically position himself in relation to Lyle?
Yes, he would be on the court.
Could you describe what you saw?
Well, as I say, he would walk to his side of the court. Mr. Menendez was a big man, and he would go right up to Lyle, oftentimes take the racket out of his hand, and he spoke with a slight accent, and he would sort of bark instructions. He spoke very quickly and very firmly in short sentences and sort of bark instructions at Lyle.
And what was Lyle's reaction to these barking of instructions?
He was very quiet. He wouldn't say anything. He would just look at Mr. Menendez and sort of just stare at him, and he wouldn't say anything. There was very little reaction.
Would he ever talk back to him?
No.
Argue with him?
No.
What would Mr. Menendez do if Lyle Menendez did something wrong on the court, hit a bad shot, or did something that Mr. Menendez did not like?
Most of the time, if he was off the court, he would just make different facial expressions. He stared a lot at just about everything Lyle did on the court.
How would you describe the facial expressions that he made to Lyle Menendez?
Stern.
And how about if Lyle Menendez did something right on the court?
There wasn't much reaction. It was more that that's what he was expected to do.
And did you also see Mr. Menendez in a competitive situation, that is at tournaments or matches or things of that nature?
You mean himself when he was playing or when Lyle was playing?
Well, let's first talk about when Lyle was playing.
Yes, I did.
And could you describe what you observed in relation to the way he would conduct himself in Lyle's presence during these tournaments?
He was always moving around in the lobby of our club. He talked a lot. He was, he could be very charming and very obnoxious at the same time. It was pretty interesting. I remember a situation where he complimented one of the other mothers on how well her son was playing, and as she started to react positively to that, he said
Could I ask him,
Objection sustained, the answer.
rephrase the question? You
Yes.
said Mr. Menendez was both obnoxious and polite or cordial at the same time. What would he do to be obnoxious?
Well, there was...
If this is the same hearsay.
Well, not with reference to things he would say, but just his behavior.
There was a match one time when Lyle was losing, and Mr. Menendez physically went out on the court and interrupted play, which is not allowed, and spoke to the opponent of Lyle that he was foot faulting, which is against the rules, but it was not his place to go out there.
When you say it's not allowed and it's not his place to go out there, what is the procedure in that kind of situation? What's supposed to happen?
When two 10-year-old boys are playing a match, we instruct them as the tournament directors that if they have some kind of problem, whether it be line calls or whatever, they're to stop the match and call for an umpire, which then one of us goes out on the court and settles their dispute.
The boys themselves are supposed to call you out?
That's right.
And what role, if any, are the parents supposed to be taking in
None.
this sort of situation?
None.
And what role did Jose Menendez take in the situation you're describing?
He actually went out on the court and spoke to the other 10-year-old boy and told him that he was going to be defaulted from the tournament if he didn't stop foot faulting.
And was this a rare occasion for Mr. Menendez or something that occurred on a regular basis?
I only saw it this once at our club.
And how did Mr. Menendez's conduct compare to other tennis parents that you came into contact with?
Sustained.
Did Mr. Menendez, in his contact with you in the presence of Lyle Menendez, make an impression on you in terms of his obnoxiousness?
It's also vague and ambiguous. Objection sustained.
All right. Now, did you meet Mrs. Menendez at any point in time?
Yes, I did.
And how and when did you meet her?
At about the same time I met the rest of the family.
And what role did she take in the tennis lessons, if any?
She was like mom's taxi. She drove the kids everywhere to their tournaments and to their lessons, and she was always there when I was working with Lyle.
And when you say she was always there, was she at the home when you were working there or at the club or both?
Both.
And what would she do during the practice sessions when she was present?
She would sit courtside. Well, first of all, she would normally have a written list of things that I was to work on that day. And
She would show up to the practices with a list?
yes,
Do you know where she got the list from?
I can only assume it was from Jose.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken.
Of your own personal knowledge, do you know where the list came, who wrote the list, if you know?
I don't know. I assume it came from Jose.
All right, you can't,
All right, the
That's
objection
fine.
sustained after the answer, I don't know.
And
Everything else is stricken.
the list that she would bring were these lists of things that you were supposed to do as a coach?
Yes.
And did the list of things include the type of instruction that Jose Menendez would give in your presence?
Yes.
And would she bring this list to her whenever she came to the practice?
Yes.
And what would happen with the list when she got there? What would she do with it?
She would meet with me quickly and, go over this list of these are the things that we were to work on that day.
And then would she leave and let you do your coaching, or would she do something else?
No, she stayed courtside for the entire, normally the lessons were an hour, and she would stay courtside for the entire hour and watch the entire lesson.
Was that unusual in your coaching experience?
Yes, most parents,
Objection sustained after yes.
When you said it was unusual, could you explain why it was unusual?
there was really no need for her to watch the entire lesson. We're professional enough to know what to do and how to carry out the lesson. She didn't need to be there. It was her right. But most parents will watch TV or read the paper or something, not watch 60 minutes of every lesson.
How long did you coach Lyle Menendez? From what period of time?
Somewhere between 2 and 3 years, I guess.
And you said, I think he was about 10 years old when he started.
Yes.
Was he about 13 when you ended the lessons?
Yes.
During that period of time that you were coaching him, did you have occasion to go inside the Menendez home?
Yes, I did.
Could you describe under what circumstances you were in the home?
After I would give a lesson to Lyle at the house, Kitty would, she was very nice to me. She would invite me in and sometimes make me lunch, so I would go in the house.
And what was the condition of the house that you observed?
Most of the time it was unkept. It was messy and dirty.
Did they have a pet around that you saw?
Yes, they had a couple of dogs and they had a ferret.
And where did you see the ferret?
The first time I saw the ferret, actually I had never seen a ferret before in my life. I was talking to Kitty, I was just a few feet away from her and I didn't know it, but it was on her back. And as I was talking to her, it jumped up over her shoulder and ran across her chest. So she was amused at how startled I was.
Did you, in your conversations and meetings with the Menendez parents, did you ever see either one of the parents compliment Lyle Menendez?
No.
Did you ever see them show any affection toward Lyle Menendez?
No.
And did you talk to other tennis coaches about the Menendez parents?
Yeah, there was,
All right, you've answered the question, yes.
And in the community of tennis coaches that you were involved with there, did Jose Menendez, Mr. Menendez, have a reputation for aggressiveness?
yes.
Objection sustained, the answer is stricken.
Well, could I approach a bench, Shirley?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Kurtain, how many other coaches did you discuss the Menendez parents with, if you know?
Several, maybe a half a dozen.
And within the circle of coaches that you discussed the parents with, did Mr. Menendez have a reputation for physical aggressiveness?
I'm not sure what you mean by physical. You mean,
Well, aggressiveness in the sense of, I'm not talking about aggressiveness on the tennis court, I mean aggressiveness in interpersonal relationships with other people.
I mean,
Did Mr. Menendez have a reputation for being aggressive with other people?
yes.
Objection sustained, the answer is stricken.
In the circle of coaches that you dealt with, did Mr. Menendez have a reputation for being verbally abusive toward other people?
Yes.
And what was his reputation?
It was not good. We all shared our stories, and like mine when he went on the court with this other boy.
All right. And based on your own personal contact with him, did you have an opinion as to whether Mr. Menendez was verbally abusive?
Yes, I thought he was very unfair in his treatment.
And more so than other parents, or
Absolutely.
just about average?
Absolutely.
How would you rank him in the number of people that you dealt with?
Sustained.
How strong of an opinion did you personally have that he was verbally abusive?
Very strong.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Any examination on behalf of Eric Menendez?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
Mr. Kurtain, when you first began coaching Lyle, he was about 10 years old,
That's right.
and that was in 1978.
That's right.
Did you meet his brother Eric Menendez at the time you first began coaching Lyle in 1978?
It was a little bit later than that.
Do you recall if it was the same year?
Yes,
or-
it was.
Okay. And Eric at that time was approximately 7 years old?
Yes.
And did you, at some point after meeting Eric, begin to coach him as well?
No, not on a regular basis. I maybe hit with him a couple of times is all.
Okay. Did you see Eric on a regular basis in connection with your coaching of Lyle?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you told us that Mr. Menendez, when you first started coaching Lyle, had told you that he wanted to make sure that Lyle was ranked.
Yes.
Okay. Did Mr. Menendez seem to have the same expectations for Eric?
Yes.
Now, when you first became acquainted with the Menendez family, they were living in a house in Pennington.
That's right.
Okay, and this was a house that had a tennis court.
Yes.
And was this also a house that was on a lake?
Yes, it was.
And did you go to the house during the summer to coach Lyle?
Yes.
And when you went to the house during the summer to coach Lyle, did you also see Eric at that time?
Yes.
Would he also be playing tennis at the home during the summer?
Yes.
Now, based on, and you continued to coach Lyle for 3 years.
Yes.
And during that 3 years, did you also have continuous contact with his brother Eric?
Yes, because he came to the club as well.
Okay, and did Eric himself receive coaching at the tennis club?
Yes.
And that was on a regular basis too?
Yes.
Did it appear to you, Mr. Kurtain, when you first had contact with Eric, that he was being pushed into playing tennis?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
You've been a coach for 20 years, correct?
Yes.
And during your 20 years as a coach, have you had occasion to see children who began to play tennis because they wanted to, and children who began to play tennis because their parents wanted them to?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Did you ever, in your experience with Eric, see any behavior which to you indicated that he perhaps did not want to play tennis or was reluctant to play tennis?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
What is a tennis parent, Mr. Kurtain?
It's, in my opinion, someone that would like to give their kids the opportunity to take up a great game.
Okay. And are there different types of tennis parents?
Yes.
Do tennis parents range from very pushy parents to more benign?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Okay. Would you describe Jose Menendez as a tennis parent?
He was very demanding and very, very driven.
Okay. And in terms of the parents that you encountered, or you have encountered over your 20 years of coaching, how would you rank Jose Menendez?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Okay. Did you ever encounter a parent who was as aggressive and demanding as Jose Menendez during your 20 years as a coach?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
When you say that Jose Menendez was aggressive and demanding, what do you mean?
It's in regard to,
Objection misstates the evidence. It said demanding and driven.
Sustained.
Okay. When you said that Jose was demanding, what do you mean?
his methods. We took tennis lessons in the rain. I would see Lyle at 6 o'clock in the morning at our club practicing before school. There was one instance at least that I saw Lyle leaving the club at 11 o'clock at night that he and Mr. Menendez were working out on the court. I thought that was strange. I said, leaving already, sort of in a sarcastic way.
All right, the objection is sustained. As far as the portion of the answer, thought it was strange, and everything thereafter. The rest of the answer will stand.
All right, so one of the things is you saw them leaving at 11 o'clock at night after having played tennis for a long period of time.
Yes.
And what about Mr. Menendez leads you to describe him as driven?
The amount of hours per week that the boys played and practiced, the amount of coaches they had at the same time. When I was working with Lyle, he had several coaches.
Okay. Let me ask you about Lyle having several coaches. Is that usual or customary for a student to have several coaches at the same time?
No.
Objection irrelevant. Over the actual step.
Okay. And is there a reason why it is not customary for a student to have several coaches at the same time?
Objection calls for speculation. Overall.
Would you repeat that, please? I'm
Is
sorry.
there a reason why it's not the usual practice for one student to have a number of coaches at the same time?
Yes, there's several reasons. One, it's very confusing for the student because teachers have different styles and different methods. It's also not necessary for a 10 or 11-year-old to have several different coaches. And thirdly, you don't develop a bonding. I mean, the student-teacher relationship that is very valuable with a coach and a student.
And during the 3 years that you coached Lyle, did you in fact develop a bonding with him based on your relationship as student and coach?
Objection irrelevant. Overall.
No.
Okay. And is a bonding between a student and coach something that is desirable in terms of the student's ability to become a better tennis player and to learn?
I think so.
Now, let me ask you about the amount of hours that Lyle worked a week, because you mentioned that. How many hours a week did you work with Lyle?
Normally twice a week, which is 2 hours.
Okay, and you were aware that he had other coaches and was working with other coaches?
Yes.
And did you see him working with other coaches at the tennis club?
No, I did not.
Okay. How were you aware that he was working a number of hours a week?
You mean with coaches or just playing?
Just playing.
Oh, because I saw it. He would play at our club several times a week, aside from working with me, and then practice, as I say, in the morning or in the evenings with Jose.
Okay, so approximately how many hours were you able to see him actually playing tennis a week?
I would say about 10 hours a week.
And is 10 hours a week an unusual or excessive amount of time for a 10-year-old to spend playing tennis?
Yes.
Okay, you said it is an unusual or excessive time for a 10-year-old?
Yes.
Can playing tennis that much, say 10 hours a week, have any negative effects on a 10-year-old, in your opinion? Okay. Based on your 20 years of coaching students in tennis, do you have any opinion as to whether or not, or what effects working 10 hours a week can have on a 10-year-old tennis player?
Overall.
You can answer.
I'm sorry. Would you please repeat?
Okay.
I get a little mixed up.
Okay. Based on your 20 years of coaching tennis, do you have any opinion, or can you tell us why it isn't good for a 10-year-old to play tennis for 10 hours a week?
It shows a lot of burnout. Many kids burn out by the time they're 15. And plus, they don't have time to do other things that normal 10-year-old boys do.
Okay. And based on your conversations with Lyle Menendez and his parents, did you also have reason to believe that Lyle played tennis at times when you didn't see him, that is, outside of the club?
Yes.
Okay, so in fact, Menendez's tennis playing could have exceeded the 10 hours that you were able to see him playing tennis.
I'm sure it did.
Now, you said that you saw Jose on the coach with Lyle giving him instructions.
Yes.
Is that right? Do you feel that you have a present memory of Mr. Menendez's instructions of Lyle so as to be able to demonstrate the manner in which he instructed his son?
Yes.
Okay, and could you stand up and demonstrate Mr. Menendez's method of giving instructions?
He was much bigger than me, but he walked very quickly, and he always had his head pointed downward. He spoke abruptly and barked. And I remember specifically one of the instructions was to take the ball on the rise, and he would go over and say, "Lyle, give me your racket." He would take his racket. "Take the ball on the rise. Let me show you." And then he would force me to feed some tennis balls to him that he would actually hit. "Take the ball on the rise. Take the ball on the rise, Lyle. Hit it this way." So it was barking in very quick, short, abrupt instructions.
And he would actually ask you to feed, Mr. Menendez would ask you to feed him balls so that he could then demonstrate what he wanted his son to do.
Yes.
Okay. And was this unusual in your experience for a parent to involve himself in coaching in this particular?
Unusual and insulting.
Did Mr. Menendez ever, to either of his sons, say, "Please do this"?
No.
Okay. Did he ever give them suggestions on how to play?
No.
How would you characterize his instructions? Were they orders?
Yes.
Did either of the Menendez sons ever react to Jose's orders, to their father's orders rather, in an unusual way?
Objection calls for speculation.
It's vague. Objection sustained.
How did the boys react to these orders from their father?
There was almost no reaction. Lyle would look at him. He would stare at him, but he was very quiet.
Did they ever say no? I'm
No.
not going to do that?
No, he did not.
Did they
Can
always?
we clarify, are you referring to both defendants or just Lyle Menendez?
Did either Eric or Lyle, in your presence, ever say no?
No.
Did they always?
Did you ever see this happen with Eric Menendez or only with Lyle Menendez?
Yes, I saw it with Eric as well.
Now, let me ask you about tournaments. You said that you were able to observe Mr. Menendez's behavior at various tennis tournaments.
Yes.
And were these tournaments in which Lyle played or Eric played or both?
Both.
And could you describe for the juries how Mr. Menendez acted if, for example, one of his sons was losing a tennis tournament?
He seemed to be very uncomfortable. And then in one way or another, he would try to take control or either of the tournament director or somehow get involved in the match itself.
Okay. And was this behavior of trying to get involved in the match or trying to take control of the tournament director, is that acceptable behavior?
No, and it's not allowed.
Okay. Now, you had mentioned one example when Mr. Menendez came out on the court and spoke to, I believe it was Lyle's 10-year-old opponent.
Yes.
Okay. What effect, if any, did that behavior by Mr. Menendez have on the boy that his son Lyle was playing with?
He
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Could you see what happened as a result of Mr. Menendez coming out onto the court in that one incident that you told us about?
the boy lost the match.
Did you see anything about the boy's demeanor change after the contact with Mr. Menendez?
Yes, he was upset.
All right. How would Mr. Menendez act if at a tournament one of his sons was losing a match?
Objection is to be asked and answered.
Sustained.
Okay, you're right. How would Mr. Menendez act if at a tournament there was an actual loss? Okay. What would happen?
If Lyle lost a tournament match, they would, there was very little word spoken. They would leave the club very, very quickly. Lyle would walk behind him and they would leave quickly. You got a feeling that he wasn't happy, and you sort of had a feeling something was going to happen at home or out of people.
Objection, speculation.
All right, objection sustained. The answer is stricken. Everything will stand up to the first. You had a feeling, and everything thereafter is stricken.
Did Mr. Menendez, as he left the club very quickly after one of his sons lost a match, did he display any anger or emotion that you recall?
No, he was very quiet and very stern.
Could you describe how Mr. Menendez acted if either one of his sons won
Yes.
a match?
Yes, he was, when they came off, he was immediately very analytical of their play, and it was normally of what they needed to do to improve or what they did wrong in that match. Oftentimes, he would actually take them right back out on the court and practice more after the match was over.
So often, after the boys won, they would go back on the court with their father and practice.
Yes.
And what type of practice would their father put them through after they had won a match?
It was normally a series of repetitive drill type things.
Would he work them hard?
Yes.
Did you ever hear Mr. Menendez say to either of his sons, good job, good effort, I'm proud of you, anything like that?
No, there was nothing congratulatory. It was more analytical about.
And how did Mr. Menendez treat you as his son's coach for 3 years?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
You stopped coaching Lyle when he was approximately 13,
Yes.
and at that time Eric was about 10.
I beg your pardon?
At the time you stopped coaching Lyle, was Eric about 10?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
And did you see Eric and Lyle after the time you stopped coaching them?
More Eric than Lyle. Lyle would sometimes practice at the club, but Eric was still taking lessons there and playing there.
Was there ever an incident that you remember occurring with Eric when he was playing when he was about 14 or 15 years old?
Yes.
Okay, and that was at the club?
Yes, it was.
And was Mr. Menendez present for that incident, if you recall?
No, he was not.
And was that, what happened at about 14 or 15 years?
It was the finals of a tournament at our club. I believe it was in the 14 and underage division, and both players were having a lot of difficulty maintaining order on the tennis court. They were both angry and making bad line calls and arguing, and they were both very upset.
And when you say bad line calls, is that when they're not calling each other's shots correctly?
Yes.
And making the line calls is, again, a responsibility that the tennis player has.
Yes.
I'm going to close an objection here. I think it's vague. I'm not sure who's claiming it.
Can we clarify?
Okay, is this a match in which Eric was playing?
Yes.
And this was with another boy?
Yes.
You described the Menendez household as one that was dirty?
Unkept.
Okay, what specifically did you see that caused you to describe it as unkept?
There were clothes, rackets, shoes. I only had the opportunity to go into the kitchen and the family room, but there, you had to move things out of the way just to sit down.
All right, thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Kurtain,
Yeah.
did you practice your Jose Menendez imitation?
Did I practice?
Did you practice that?
No, but I can remember it.
You can remember that? Well, getting back to the practice that you put Lyle Menendez through,
Yes.
you say that you coached him two hours per week?
Yes.
And that he would practice about 10 hours that you knew of per week?
Yes.
Now, is there a ranking system on a state or national basis for 10-year-olds?
No longer.
Was there then in 1978?
Yes.
And in fact, in order to be ranked, I would assume that you would have to, the player would have to put in a lot of time in practice. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
So if a person was ranked, what would you expect him to put in as far as practice time?
I would say 3 hours a week.
3 hours a week?
They normally would take a lesson. What's normal is they might participate in a junior program where it's a group situation, and then they might play a practice match, which is typical.
And you coached Lyle Menendez for 2 hours, correct?
Yes, on 2 separate days.
So that'd be 4 hours?
No, I'm sorry. 1 hour at a time on 2 separate days.
And were both of those at the club?
In the winter months, yes. In the summer months, it was at their home.
So you didn't spend much time there?
At the home?
Or at either place with Lyle Menendez?
At the tennis club, I'm there 15 hours a day.
Okay. But specifically coaching Eric or Lyle Menendez, it was 2 hours?
Yes.
So in the summertime, you'd spend a total of 2 hours per week at the home?
Well, in most cases, I would spend a little more time because I would talk with Kitty afterwards, or we'd sit and have lunch. And sometimes I got there and the kids weren't around at the hour I was supposed to be coaching.
Would you chat with Kitty Menendez?
Yes.
You indicated that she was nice and she would make you lunch?
Yes.
When you talked about the house, that it was messy, you said that there was clothes laying around and tennis rackets and tennis shoes?
Yes.
Would that be the defendant's clothes, their tennis rackets, their clothes?
It was both. It seemed to be adult clothes. There were dishes all over the kitchen. It was very unkept.
Okay, but the major mess was this tennis clothing that was strewn about.
Overruled.
It was a variety of things. There were toys, there were tennis clothes, there were just a variety of things throughout the house.
There were also toys?
Yes.
Did you believe those toys to be the defendants or the parents?
I assume they were the defendants.
Okay, and they were just throwing them out around the house? Just laying around?
Just some things lying around.
Were the defendants pretty messy?
Objection, Your Honor. Cross the speculation.
Sustained.
Now, you testified as to some animals that were at the house.
Yes.
Now, you indicated that Mr. Menendez was very demanding and he barked his orders to his sons. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was his, how would you characterize the barking? Would it be more like a dog or a ferret or what? How would you characterize that?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
Have you ever heard, did you ever hear the ferret bark?
No.
Does a ferret bark?
Objection, relevant.
Sustained.
I have nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Anything else? Redirect by Lyle Menendez.
Mr. Kurtain, you said that there is no longer a ranking system for 10-year-olds.
That's right.
Is there some reason for that?
Yes, because the USTA, which is the United States Tennis Association, has recognized that the demands on kids of that age group are very difficult, and there's been a track record of burnout as the kids get to be 15 and 16 years old.
And when did that policy change?
About 2 years ago.
And in your opinion, based on your contact with Lyle Menendez, was he someone who was approaching that burnout rate just from the amount of practice that he was putting in at 10-year-old, as a 10-year-old?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Based on your personal observation of Lyle Menendez, based on your 20 years of coaching, and based on your observation of him, was he over-practicing for a 10-year-old based on the then prevailing standards?
Yes.
Is there any doubt in your mind about that?
No.
You said that you saw him playing in the rain at one
Yes.
point. Do you know?
Sustained.
Well, this is responsive to the questions about he only coached him 2 hours a week, Your Honor.
Well, this is beyond the scope. Objection sustained.
You said on cross-examination you were asked if you only coached him for a certain period of time per week, correct?
Yes.
And did you say the coaching lasted about 2 hours per week?
Yes.
Did you also see Lyle Menendez at times when you were not coaching him?
Yes.
And is one of the times you saw him, the incident you described where you saw him playing tennis in the rain?
Yes, and I also played with him in the rain.
And how old was he when you were playing with him in the rain?
It was during the entire time that I worked with him. I mean, if I was outside and it started to rain, we just continued. There was no stopping.
And was that your choice, Lyle Menendez's choice, or someone else's
It was
decision?
Jose's choice.
He would actually tell you to continue to practice? Did you ever see him play in the winter? In bad weather during the winter?
No, we were at the club in the winter months.
When did you quit coaching Lyle Menendez?
Objection, Mr. Janaski, and answer beyond the scope.
Sustained.
You said you coached him for 2 hours a week. How long did that 2 hours
Okay, counsel,
a week?
let's not go over things that were covered on direct. This
I'm
is all
trying not to,
material that's
Your
been
Honor.
covered already.
Trying not to. When did you, why did you stop coaching Lyle Menendez?
Because I guess I was fired. I raised an objection in terms of him being involved in my lessons with Lyle.
Who being involved?
Him, I'm sorry, Jose. And I said, you know, you're paying me to coach, let me coach, and you be the parent and I'll be the coach. I said, you know, you have to make a decision. You either let me coach him or you coach him. And he said, fine, I'll coach him, and he left.
Was winning very important to Jose Menendez?
Yes.
Was it all important?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Did Mr. Menendez ever indicate to you how important winning was to him?
Objection calls for hearsay. It's beyond the scope.
This is
Sustained.
not offered for its truth.
Objection sustained.
It's offered to show a state of mind.
Objection sustained.
Did you ever observe Jose Menendez in a situation where you personally observed him and in a situation where it indicated to you that he thought winning was all important?
Objection calls for speculation beyond the scope again.
Sustained on the first ground.
Did you ever see Jose Menendez himself play in a competitive situation?
Yes, I did.
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained on the basis that it's beyond the scope.
And when you say that winning was important to Jose Menendez, why do you say that?
Objection is irrelevant.
Sustained.
I believe that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, anything else?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, thank you. You may step down. You're excused.
Mrs. Geisler, do you know Lyle and Eric Menendez?
Yes.
And how is it that you know them?
I was their lifeguard at Beatonsbrook Country Club in Skillman, New Jersey, the summers of 1980 and 1981.
And if they were born in 68 and 70 respectively, that would have made them 9 and 10 and 12 and 13 on those summers. Does that sound about right?
Yes, it does.
And where were you a lifeguard?
I was a lifeguard at Beatonsbrook Country Club, which was in Skillman, New Jersey.
And what type of a country club is this? Is it fairly small where you know everybody, or a huge group?
No, it was a, I don't know the numbers of members, but it was, I would say, a relatively small club, but a club that you got to know most of the families and the children that came to the pool every day.
And did most of the people seem to come from the immediate area, and the kids went to the same schools?
Yeah, I would say that it's in the Princeton area, so most of the families were from Skillman, Princeton, Hopewell, and that general vicinity, and all the schools in those areas drew from basically the same communities.
And during the 2 summers that you were working there as a lifeguard, did you actually get to know Lyle and get to know Eric?
I can't say that I developed a really strong relationship with either Lyle or Eric. I know I was a swim coach as well, and Eric was on the swim team, so I spent a little bit more time with Eric than I did with Lyle.
Was this the first time you had ever coached, or did you coach before?
I had coached at other clubs in other cities prior to Beatonsbrook.
And had you been a lifeguard before?
Yeah, I had been a lifeguard for several previous summers.
And did you swim competitively yourself?
Yeah, I swam competitively from age 8 through college.
When you would see Lyle and Eric Menendez, would they be there together, or would they come individually?
Mrs. Menendez would drop them off pretty much every day. At the same time, the pool would open about 10 o'clock, and Mrs. Menendez would be there with the 2 children at 10:01, dropping them off basically every single day.
And did she stay with them?
No, she would drop them off and really didn't see her again until the end of the day when the pool would close about 7 o'clock.
Was this unusual at that pool?
Yeah, I would say it was relatively unusual. It was a club where the families kind of hung out together, and if it was not if the mother was a non-working mother, then typically the mother would come and spend time at the pool with the children, or play tennis with the kids, or play golf with the kids. It was a multi-purpose club, so it was atypical that a mother would drop the children off and be gone for the entire day.
And would she come back on some occasions and check on them?
Not that I recall.
When the boys were at the pool, did they seem to know a lot of the other families and hang out with some other families they were close to?
Not really. It was typically at a pool there are various cliques. A group of kids will hang out together, and if somebody's not in that clique, then there's another clique that a group of kids will hang out together, and neither Eric nor Lyle were in any of the cliques at the pool. Again, Eric was at the pool, I remember, a lot more frequently than Lyle, and Eric seemed to be by himself most of the time at the pool.
Did their experience at the pool appear to be different from the other children you observed?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, the fact that they didn't have very many friends, or any friends that I remember at the pool with them, was very atypical of that club. Again, it was a club where the kids went to elementary schools together, and junior highs together, and high schools together, and so the fact that here were two kids from the area that went to the same school as the rest of the members and didn't have any friends was atypical.
And was their behavior or their experience unusual enough that it was commented upon?
Yeah.
Objection calls for hearsay.
Not what they said, Your Honor, just that it was discussed.
Overall.
Yes, in fact.
Okay, you've answered the question.
I can, okay.
No, you've answered
no.
the question.
Oh,
That's
I'm
it.
sorry. Okay.
Now, when you say they were dropped off virtually every day, would there be some days that there was bad weather?
Yes, in fact, it was the fact that they were dropped off virtually every day that I lifeguarded, and I was there 7 days a week, and they would be dropped off rain, shine, thunderstorm, inclement weather. It didn't matter. Basically, right after the pool opened, they would be dropped off, and oftentimes the pool would be closed until the thunderstorms went away, and they typically would be hanging out in the cabana waiting for Mrs. Menendez to pick them up, and it usually wasn't right away, whereas most other mothers, if they had dropped off their children, would be there right away to pick up the kids.
Did this happen just on one occasion or on more than one occasion?
It happened on more than one occasion because there were multiple thunderstorms during the summers in that part of New Jersey.
Now, on the days when they were there, would Lyle and Eric be together, or would Lyle be somewhere else?
Well, most often, again, Eric would be at the pool for the most part. I remember Lyle being up at the tennis court for the most part, and the tennis court was about 50 yards, I'd say, up a hill from the pool. Definitely within earshot distance, but not at the pool itself. But Eric, when he was done when Lyle would be done at the tennis court, I remember him coming down to the pool and taking a dip here and there.
And would Eric be there by himself then during these periods of time?
Yes, he would be.
And when Lyle was up on the tennis court, would he be up there for an hour or two at a time?
It seemed that he was up there for much longer periods of time than just an hour. He would be up there literally, from my recollection, would be up there for hours and hours at a time. And again, that was, I thought, pretty atypical because of the weather and the humidity in New Jersey. It was probably 90 degrees and close to that in humidity very often, and to be up at the tennis court that long was, I thought, odd.
And would he be up at the tennis court with one of his parents or with a coach or what?
I think he was up there with the coach. I remember hearing, again, it wasn't right at the vicinity, but it was enough that you could hear activity going on, and I remember hearing dialogue between Lyle and a coach, or an instructor. I don't know if it was a coach, but the tennis pro at the time.
And would there be times when his father would show up and play tennis with him?
Yeah, I do recall Mr. Menendez being up there and Lyle hitting ball after ball after ball after ball for, again, I don't know the exact length of time because I never really clocked it, but it seemed to be an extraordinary amount of time with Mr. Menendez asking him to hit harder, ball after ball after ball.
And did you hear things like good shot or nice work or any sort of positive comments during that?
Not to my recollection, no.
And was Eric on the swim team?
Eric was on the swim team.
And you were the coach?
I was one of 3 coaches.
And how often did the swim team practice?
We had practice every afternoon. I think it was about 4:30 to 5:30 or so, every afternoon, Monday through Friday.
And were there swimming meets?
There were swimming meets about, I'd say, once to twice a week. I don't remember the entire schedule, but there were meets on a weekly basis.
And when you had the swimming practice, how long would that last?
Swimming practice would last about 45 minutes to an hour.
Were the kids tired after it?
Yeah, typically it was. We had kids anywhere from age 8 to age probably 13, 14, and it was a pretty strenuous workout, and we were getting them to do probably 1,000 plus, 1,500 yards at a time, and that was a pretty strenuous workout.
And would there be times after this workout when Mr. Menendez would show up?
Yes, Mr. Menendez would sometimes pick the boys up after he'd get home from work, and he would jump into the pool after the swim practice was over because the pool was closed for general swim at that hour, and he would get in the pool to swim laps and would ask Eric to swim laps with him, and this would be right after a practice.
Okay, now would he ask Eric or
get in the pool and swim laps with me?
Did Eric look happy about this?
No, I couldn't say he looked happy. He was relatively exhausted from a swim practice, and then he had to go in and swim more laps. It was nothing that I don't think he ever looked forward to.
And how long would the session with his father be?
Well, the pool closed at 7, so I would say if practice was 4:30 to 5:30, Mr. Menendez would pick them up maybe around 6, and it would last for about a half an hour or so.
And do you remember seeing Mr. Menendez at meets in
Yes.
which Eric was swimming?
Yes, I did. Both Mr. and Mrs. Menendez would attend the meets. Mrs. Menendez, we would need volunteers from the members to be officials, to act as officials at the meet. So Mrs. Menendez would be an official, a timer, a judge of some kind, and Mr. Menendez would be there to watch.
And was Eric a good swimmer?
Eric was a very good swimmer. He was a naturally gifted swimmer.
And did he try hard?
Yeah, he always tried hard. He was very polite, very hardworking in practice, always listened to the coaches, and was a very good and hardworking swimmer.
When he would swim in these meets, would you see his father do something that struck you as unusual?
Yes, unusual enough that it was remarked upon by the other coaches.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken as non-responsive after yes.
Okay. And what would you see Mr. Menendez do which you thought was unusual?
Mr. Menendez would be, when Eric would be swimming in a race, he would be running up and down the length of the pool, basically yelling at Eric, who was a breaststroker, to swim harder, and not in a very positive, reinforcing way, but more in a you're not swimming fast enough way.
Now, you commented he was a breaststroker. What's the significance of that?
Well, every stroke you come up for a breath, so every time Eric would come up for a breath, he would hear his father yelling, harder, harder, or whatever. I mean, it was whatever his comment was at the moment. But it would be for the length of 25 yards or 50 yards. Every time Eric would come up for a breath, he would see Mr. Menendez running up and down the length of the pool, which was, again, no other parents would be doing that.
Now, you've heard parents cheering their kids on, is that correct?
Yes.
Was this what that behavior was all about, or was it something different?
It was different than the kids I had coached before and lifeguarded before. It was much more atypical of this caliber of swimming, of competitive swimming. This was a summer league, summer recreation club, and they were in a summer league competitive swimming situation, and it wasn't by far the most competitive swimming one could participate in. There's much more competitive swimming out there, and to be that...
There's no question.
Sustained. Ask your next question.
Since it wasn't that competitive, did that make the behavior even more unusual?
Yes, because this was really for fun. It wasn't... There were medals and ribbons awarded to the swimmers, but typically it was just a fun atmosphere. It should have been a fun atmosphere for the kids that were participating in it.
What would happen to Eric when he got to the end of his lane at the end of the race?
Mr. Menendez would usually be waiting for him at the end of his lane, and Eric, I recall, was a pretty lanky and skinny young boy, and Mr. Menendez would basically pull him up with his thumbs in Eric's armpits and take him out of the water, and if he didn't like Eric's performance, he would not really aggressively, but kind of take him out and shake him and say, you didn't swim fast enough, you didn't swim fast enough, you should be swimming harder. And I have vivid memories of that.
Would he do that even when Eric won sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, he would do it win, lose, or draw. I mean, yeah, he did that.
Do you ever see any other parents lift their children out of the water like that?
No, I would see parents kind of bring them out and hug the kids, whether they came in dead last or won the race. I'd see other parents hug and say, great race, and way to go, and if they didn't win the race, you'll get them next time. And
Okay, you've answered the question.
And did you ever see Mr. Menendez comfort Eric or congratulate him or say anything positive to him?
No, it was more humiliation in front of his competitors and teammates.
And how did Eric look when this happened?
Very sad, very sad. And, he would typically just kind of walk away and be very sad about his father's, his father's way.
And was Mrs. Menendez around at the time?
She would be officiating, and she would have an opportunity to go over there and say good race, but she never did. She was on to her next job at the pool or whatever. She was never there to comfort Eric after Mr. Menendez was tongue lashing him.
Would she ever interfere in try to tell Mr. Menendez that it's not the way to treat the boy?
No, she just pretty much echoed whatever Mr. Menendez would do. I never saw her support Eric at all.
And was this something that happened more than once?
Yeah, it pretty much happened at every meet, with every race.
Did you see any sort of affection from either parent?
No, I did not.
And did you, after Eric was lifted out of this water and out of the water and dressed down like this, would Mr. Menendez give him a little pat, something like that?
He would, after he dressed him down, as you said, he would kind of go, and that's it. I mean, I never really saw anything. No, I never saw hugs or any kind of warmth. I would just see kind of a pat, and then Eric would go to his towel and wait for his next race.
All right, the objection's overruled. She's finished the answer. When you said pat, you were patting your shoulder.
Pat, yeah, pat the shoulder.
Were there parents that you got to know who were taking their children there either for the swim team or just for recreation?
Yeah, I mean,
Irrelevant.
It's foundational, Your Honor, if I may.
Overruled. Your answer is yes?
yes, there were.
And in families like that, if you saw the parents doing something destructive, would you have commented on it?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Did you ever comment to Mr. Menendez or Mrs. Menendez about their behavior?
No, I didn't feel like I was in a position to do that because I was
All right, you've answered the question. You said no.
Why?
because I was a paid employee of the club, and the Menendez were members of the club, and they, in a sense, were paying my salary for the summer.
How old were you at the time?
I was 20 and 21.
How many kids do you think that in the course of your coaching and lifeguarding you got to see interact with their parents?
Objection irrelevant.
Overall.
Go ahead.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I mean, look, 400, 500.
Did you ever see any other parents behave in the way that the Menendez parents did?
No, I did not.
Have you seen Lyle and Eric Menendez since 1981?
No, I have not.
Have you had any contact with them?
No, I have not.
Thank you. From observing Eric around the pool and in the swimming, could you describe his personality, what his behavior was like?
He was lonely. He was a sad, introverted, insecure boy.
Objection, this is speculation, Your Honor.
He was a sad...
Wait, hold on a second.
Sorry.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken. You can break it down if you like.
Okay. What did he look like when he was around the pool? Would he be by himself?
He would be by himself.
And how did he look?
Sad. Lonely.
Objection, this is speculation, Your Honor.
All right, the objection is overruled. As far as the description sad, as far as lonely, that's stricken as a conclusion.
Okay. So he looked sad and he was alone all the time? Is that correct?
Yes, he was.
Okay. Did he appear to be shy to you?
Objection is also speculation.
Overruled.
Yes, he was shy.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
All right, any other questions on behalf of Eric Menendez?
No, Your Honor. Ms. Lansing did the
All right.
examination.
Cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Geisler? You indicated in direct examination that you were asked a question whether Kitty Menendez, the mother, would ever check on them during the day, and you stated you do not recall that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you recall making a statement to the defense attorneys in this case on June 14th, 1993? Do you recall that?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your
Do
question.
you recall?
Wasn't to us. Wasn't our interview.
Do you recall making a statement to somebody with the defense team on June 14th, 1993?
I was interviewed by a investigator, yes, but I don't know that was the date.
And didn't you state that Kitty would come by during the day to check on the boys?
I don't recall making that statement. I do not
Would it
recall.
refresh your recollection to take a look at this report?
Sure.
Okay. Directed to page 2 of this report, dated 6/14/93, statement of Meredith Geisler. I'm ask you to take a look at this highlighted section.
Okay. I guess I did say
Does
that.
that refresh your present recollection?
Yeah.
Okay, so Kitty Menendez checked on her sons during the day.
Overruled.
Very infrequently.
But you recall now?
Very infrequently.
Okay. Now, you were talking about swim meets 1 or 2 times a week? Is that correct?
1 to 2 swim meets a week, yes.
And both parents would be there?
Yes.
And Mrs. Menendez would be an official?
Yes.
And Mr. Menendez, would it be fair to say, was very enthusiastic about his son swimming?
Objection, calls for conclusion.
Sustained.
Would he appear to be excited about his son as his son was swimming?
Objection, calls for conclusion.
Sustained.
You've indicated that Mr. Menendez would run up and down the sidelines and exhort him to, Eric Menendez, to swim faster. Is that correct?
Yes, he would.
Okay. When Eric Menendez first came to you in 1980, 1981, he was already a good swimmer, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Did you know that his father had worked with him in swimming?
Objection, Your Honor. Assumes the fact, not numbers.
Overruled.
You can answer it, ma'am.
No, I did not.
In fact, Mr. Menendez, you said that Mrs. Menendez would drop the defendants off in the morning and come to pick them up at 7 o'clock, correct?
Basically, when the pool would close.
Isn't it true that Jose Menendez would come to the club straight from work and he would swim?
Not every day. It was
Quite often.
on occasion, yes.
And he would come straight to work and he would swim laps.
Yes, he would.
And he'd swim with Eric Menendez, correct?
Yes, he would.
Now, Jose and Kitty Menendez took the swimming pretty seriously. Would that be fair to say?
Objection calls for conclusion.
Sustained.
You had indicated that Eric Menendez was a good breaststroker, is that right?
Yes.
And he was big and strong for his age?
I don't think he was big. He was pretty skinny, if I recall. But
he
he was
strong?
good for his age.
And
Object, Your Honor, is beyond your personal knowledge of strong which Your Honor or something.
Objection overruled. The answer will stand.
you coached him, correct? And
Yes,
you
I
saw
did.
him.
I was one of 3 coaches, yes.
Okay, and you would coach him for 45 minutes a day, is that right?
Yeah. 5 days a week, not every day.
Would they come there on the weekends too?
Yes, for the most part.
And the family would come on the weekends, or the parents would also be there on the weekends during the day?
Less often than the boys would be there.
Now, you had indicated that you had never seen Mrs. Menendez offer any kind of encouragement, is that correct? Any
Yes.
kind of support?
Oh.
See Mrs. Menendez ever offer Eric Menendez any kind of support, or Lyle Menendez any kind of support?
No, I did not.
Okay. Again, yes, it's your pages are unnumbered, but it's the 4th page, and it's the 2nd line. Now, you had indicated,
4th page, I'm sorry.
2nd line,
Go ahead.
okay. You indicated that you did see Kitty put her arm around the boy sometimes. Is that correct?
In that interview?
Yeah,
is that
yes.
what if it says that, yes, I did.
Okay, but you testified earlier that you never saw any of that.
It was very, very rare.
Okay.
Very rare.
So when you said that you did see Kitty Menendez put her arm around the boy sometimes, that you saw that,
Very rarely.
all right? And you indicated that Mr. Menendez would sometimes pat his son on the shoulder after a meet?
Mm-hmm.
Is that yes?
Yes.
In fact, Eric Menendez sometimes won his meets. Like he came in first.
Yes,
he
he
got a
would.
medal. Is that right?
I think we gave out ribbons, but
Ribbons?
yes. Hmm.
And did his parents appear to be proud that he had won these medals?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for conclusion.
Sustained.
Okay. No further questions.